Welcome to another quiet journey through hidden worlds and familiar absurdity. Tonight we drift into Quahog, the strange little town where nothing ever really changes, and every laugh hides a fragment of secret lore. If you enjoy these slow explorations, make sure to subscribe so you can keep wandering with us through more strange universes to fall asleep to. So close your eyes, slow your breath, and let's begin. There is something faintly dreamlike about the town of Quahog. It is not a place one could find on any map, yet everyone who has ever drifted through an episode could probably picture its streets. The curved suburban lanes, the washed-out greens and quiet browns, the familiar silhouettes of houses that seem to hum faintly under a cloudy Rhode Island sky. It feels less like a cartoon setting and more like a recurring dream, one where the same street always turns back into itself, where the same neighbors are always outside at the same time, where the air seems to smell faintly of both television static and nostalgia. You begin to notice how the town's geography makes no real sense. The school is close to the bar is close to the brewery is somehow down the street from the Griffin house. But none of that seems wrong when you are half asleep and watching. The map bends to the rhythm of memory rather than logic. The place is built not for realism, but for a feeling. The way an old photograph can feel accurate without being precise. In Quahog, time is soft. One day it is summer and the next it is winter, and no one mentions the change. The Griffins have celebrated Christmas at least 24 times, each one the first. There is no aging, no long winter between seasons. It is always today and always yesterday. This is the secret of Quahog's dreamlike nature. It is built out of loops, not lines. The past folds quietly into the present. The show can reboot, destroy, and rebuild the town in a single episode, and by next week, everything is clean again. The town absorbs trauma like a sponge absorbs water. It swells for a moment, then returns to its ordinary shape. If you look closely, the architecture of Quahog tells the same story. The Griffin house is a perfect middle American illusion. Yellow siding, red roof, a green lawn without a season. The sidewalk is always the same length. The front door never locks. The camera angle never shifts. Even the neighboring houses seem positioned by instinct rather than city planning. The visual language of the town is memory, not design. Every window glows the same way, every shadow falls in a soft, unhurried direction. It is a world without weather, a stage lit by imagination. And yet, despite its simplicity, Quahog feels crowded with life. Every background extra has a secret. Every passing car feels like it belongs to someone who matters. There's a faint hum of continuity behind every cutaway, as if those fragmented jokes are still happening somewhere off-screen. You might imagine that when you turn off the television, the people of Quahog simply go on living in silence, waiting for their next line, existing like frozen echoes in an unending sitcom dream. There is comfort in that idea, the same kind of comfort that comes from reruns, from repetition, from knowing that even if the world resets, some version of the same small town will always return. Quahog is a vision of America that has been filtered through decades of laughter and absurdity, yet it still manages to feel like home. It is both parody and memory, both unreal and familiar. It is the kind of place that doesn't try to convince you it's real. It only asks that you visit for a little while until sleep catches up with you. Somewhere beyond the edges of the frame, the streetlights of Quahog glow faintly in the night. The voices fade, the laugh track becomes distant. The town remains, patient, unchanging, waiting for another story to begin exactly where the last one ended. When you start to pay attention to the streets of Quahog, something unusual happens. The geography begins to dissolve, and in its place grows a quiet rhythm. a pattern that feels less like a real city and more like the faint repetition of a lullaby. Spooner Street always curves gently into itself. The houses on either side seem perfectly balanced, like mirrored memories. No matter how many times Peter drives to the clam or walks to the drunken clam with his friends, the journey feels identical. Every sidewalk is both the same and slightly altered, as if the world redraws itself from memory every time the scene changes. The streets have that strange looping quality found in half-remembered dreams, where you keep turning corners that lead back to where you started. It's part of the illusion that makes Family Guy feel strangely timeless. You could be watching an episode from 1999 or one from 2025, and the same fire hydrant will still be there, the same patch of grass by the same mailbox. This architectural stillness is part of the comfort. In Quahog, change happens only in stories, never in structure. Even when the world collapses, a meteor strike, a nuclear blast, a musical apocalypse, the camera fades back to the Griffin house, and everything is fine again. The layout never questions itself. If you think about it, this isn't laziness, it's design. The background of Family Guy works like a memory palace. Every corner is a mnemonic anchor, a visual trigger that tells your brain you've been here before. The town doesn't evolve because it isn't meant to. Its architecture serves as the emotional scaffolding for chaos. When Peter crashes his car into the house for the 15th time, the damage never stays. The door never warps, the walls never crack. It's as if the house itself forgives him, like the set of a dream that resets the moment you look away. The repeating geometry of Quahog mirrors the cyclical logic of television comfort. You watch forward because you expect something new, but because you want to return to a place that never changes. The same front yard, the same neighborhood gossip, the same bar stool waiting under soft yellow lights. Every establishing shot feels like a deep breath before another absurdity begins. If you freeze a frame of any episode, you might notice how perfectly symmetrical everything is. The houses line up as if drawn by a steady hand that doesn't tire. The horizon sits calmly in the background, untouched by time or weather. There's a peacefulness to that stillness, a suggestion that no matter what happens, Quahog remains. It's a fantasy of stability painted in flat colors and gentle lines. And yet, there's something slightly eerie about it too. Because if the streets never change, if the landmarks never move, then time itself must not be real here. Every story happens simultaneously, like ripples on the same surface. The streets become a map of endless moments, where yesterday and tomorrow share the same address. In that sense, Quahog's architecture is not just visual. It's emotional. It's the geography of memory. The town is built out of your own recognition, your own nostalgia for something that never quite existed. When you close your eyes and imagine that familiar yellow house at the end of the street, you can almost hear the faint hum of a streetlight, the bark of a dog, the low chatter from the clam drifting through an upwent window. It's a strange kind of comfort, the comfort of knowing that somewhere in a looping, animated world, the streets of Quahog are still lit, the houses still standing, the map quietly folded inside itself. Always ready for the next rerun, always waiting for you to return. The Griffin house sits like an anchor in the drifting seas of Quahog. Its yellow siding glows softly beneath the sky that never truly darkens or brightens. It only changes tone, from soft blue to pale lavender, depending on the story that day. The red roof is the same shade in every episode, every decade, as if time itself politely refuses to enter the front door. You could think of the house as the most consistent object in the Family Guy universe. No matter how absurd or catastrophic the events outside become, this house remains, a kind of living photograph. perfectly still yet endlessly animated. When the show began in 1999, the Griffin home already looked old. The furniture felt second-hand, the carpet slightly faded, the decor trapped in the middle of the 1980s. 2.5 decades later, it still looks exactly the same. The TV never becomes flat, the couch never changes color. Even the wallpaper, an unassuming pattern of plain beige, seems immune to the idea of redecoration. It's as if the house exists in its own protected bubble of time, sealed away from progress and decay. That stillness has its own kind of poetry. Every episode begins with the assumption that the Griffins will return here, to this precise living room, and reset their lives. The space absorbs their chaos. It witnesses every argument, every absurdity, every confession. The moment the credits roll, it quietly erases everything, smoothing the emotional wrinkles before the next week begins. It's the ultimate sitcom paradox, a permanent change inside a perfectly static shell. The living room itself feels like a small museum of their collective memory. The green couch, the old television, the upright piano against the wall, all of it arranged exactly as it was in the very first episode. You could trace the history of the family by standing in that room, yet nothing inside it gives away any sense of real time passing. Even the baby toys stay where they always were. Stewie's presence is frozen at the age of 1, and so the house remains frozen around him, suspended in the gravity of eternal infancy. If you listen carefully during quieter scenes, you might imagine the house breathing. Not literally, of course, but in that faint, almost psychological way familiar rooms seem to hum when they've held too many conversations. There's a kind of emotional residue that clings to places we return to over and over. The Griffin house feels like that, a container of memories that never fade but never age. When Peter laughs, or Lois sighs, or Brian offers another piece of weary commentary, it all seems to echo faintly against the same walls, layering softly, never quite disappearing. Sometimes the show plays with this illusion. A hurricane will strike, or an explosion will destroy the house completely. For a moment you might think this time it's permanent. But then a cutaway later, the walls are back spotless and familiar. The house refuses to stay broken. It heals itself, invisibly. It doesn't need repair, it just resets. Like a memory reasserting itself after a dream. And in that way, the Griffin house becomes something more than scenery. It's a ritual space. A place where time folds and repeats, where all the absurd adventures of Quahog begin and end. Every episode is another day spent inside the same dream. And when the show fades to black, you can almost feel the quiet of that empty house. The clock ticking softly, the lights dimmed, the world outside gone silent. The Griffin house waits, it always waits, for the next absurdity, the next laugh, the next improbable morning where nothing has changed at all. Peter Griffin lives in a world that bends gently around him. It's as if the laws of physics, time, and consequence have all quietly agreed to step aside, letting him exist in whatever shape the story needs him to. He can die and be alive again by dinner. He can win the lottery, lose it, and forget it ever happened. He can be a genius in one episode and completely mindless in the next, and the world never questions it. It simply stretches to fit his contradictions like an old sweater that never tears. Peter exists at the center of a flexible universe, one that forgives him, infinitely, one that forgets just as easily as it remembers. If you pay attention, his reality doesn't just reset, it expands and contracts depending on how much absurdity he brings into it. When Peter becomes an astronaut, Quahog suddenly develops a space program. When he's a fisherman, the ocean moves closer. When he's unemployed, the town shrinks to the size of his living room. It's as if the universe of Family Guy takes its shape from Peter's imagination, constantly rearranging itself to make room for his chaos. He is not just a character inside Quahog. He is its gravitational center. The world tilts around him. There's something oddly gentle about that. For all his ignorance and impulsiveness, Peter lives in a forgiving dimension. He breaks the rules of his world almost daily, and yet it never punishes him for long. Every act of destruction is followed by laughter, every mistake by a soft return to normalcy. It's a kind of cartoon reincarnation, a cycle of error and erasure. He's a man who can destroy his own house, crash a car through a school, insult everyone he knows, and still wake up the next day untouched. In a strange way, his lack of consequence gives him a strange purity, a permanent childlike freedom that most adults lose. And yet sometimes the cracks show. There are rare moments when Peter seems to remember too much, when the elastic boundaries of his world tighten slightly around him. He'll reference something that shouldn't be remembered, a death, a past job, a timeline that no longer exists. And for a moment he becomes aware of it. Then, like a dream dissolving in morning light, the awareness fades. The elasticity reasserts itself. The joke moves on. It's tempting to see Peter as a symbol of the show itself. Boundless, endlessly self-reinventing, defined only by the joke of the moment, but underneath that there's something deeper. The soft melancholy of a man who cannot truly change because his world won't let him. Every episode resets his moral compass to zero. Every lesson evaporates. He is trapped in eternal return, smiling through it all, unaware that he has lived 1,000 identical lives. There's a certain peace in that, too. In the elastic world of Quahog, suffering never lasts. Mistakes fade like chalk in the rain. The universe always restores itself to balance, and Peter, oblivious and unburdened, goes back to his couch, back to his beer, back to his favorite chair as if nothing has happened. He lives in the ultimate fantasy, the dream where every wrong can be undone, every pain erased by laughter. Sometimes when you watch him, you can almost envy that freedom, the way he breaks everything without consequence, the way his world stretches to forgive him. It's chaos without cruelty, foolishness without real loss. His life is elastic, yes, but it is also strangely serene. A man drifting through infinite do-overs, smiling in the soft gravity of a universe that refuses to let anything truly break. Lois Griffin carries herself like someone who remembers more than she should. There's a stillness in her tone, a subtle knowing that doesn't quite fit inside the structure of her world. While everyone else in Quahog floats through the constant loop of erasure and reset, Lois sometimes seems to hold on to faint traces of what came before. It's in the way she sighs when Peter repeats the same mistake, in the quiet way she looks at her children as if she's already lived this exact moment before. She plays her role as the rational center of the family, but behind her eyes, there's the faint flicker of déjà vu, like a person trapped in a rerun who knows she's been here 1,000 times before. In the language of Family Guy's strange continuity, Lois becomes the emotional timekeeper. She doesn't resist the loops, but she senses them. When the town resets, she doesn't question it, but she pauses just long enough for the audience to feel the whisper of repetition. The illusion of memory flickers through her like a ghost. One moment she's furious at Peter's recklessness, the next she's laughing along with him, the tension erased. Yet somehow her tone carries the faint echo of something unspoken, as if she remembers every argument that's ever been forgotten. It's an odd kind of burden. Lois exists in a world that cannot hold long-term emotional continuity. Nothing sticks, and yet she's written as someone capable of reflection. That makes her a paradox, a self-aware character living inside an amnesiac world. When she disciplines her children, she seems genuinely tired in a way that feels deeper than the surface joke. It's the fatigue of someone who has done this before, endlessly without progress. There's no growth in Quahog, but Lois behaves as if she expects it anyway. That expectation is her tragedy. She's not just a sitcom mother. She's the only adult in a town that never learns. Every week she starts fresh, but her patience never completely renews. It carries faint bruises from the weeks before. You can sense it in her voice, calm, sharp, but edged with something that feels like memory trying to survive inside a world that refuses to acknowledge it. Her illusion of continuity gives her emotional depth, but it also isolates her. Everyone else forgets, she endures. Sometimes the show hints at her awareness, a look to camera, a lingering silence. A line delivered with a tone that seems just a little too knowing. She's the quiet acknowledgement of the loop, the still point in a spinning world. If Peter represents chaos without consequence, Lois represents consequence without permanence, a consciousness that remembers what can't officially exist. If you imagine Quahog as a dream that endlessly restarts, then Lois is the part of the dream that knows it's repeating. She is the pulse that says this has all happened before. And still, she carries on, setting the table, raising her children, patching up her husband's mistakes as if it all mattered. That's what gives her calmness its weight. She's not naive. She's accepting. She plays her part fully, even when she knows it's all destined to be forgotten. There's a kind of peace in that. A slow, graceful endurance. Lois becomes the keeper of emotion in a world where emotion resets nightly. She remembers for everyone else, even if no one believes her. Maybe that's why she's the only one who ever seems truly human. Her patience, her sighs, her quiet warmth, they're the threads holding together a dream that constantly forgets itself. And somewhere in that rhythm, between the forgotten arguments and the recycled laughter, Lois Griffin stands quietly in her kitchen, hands resting on the counter, eyes soft but aware. She knows the moment will end and begin again. She knows she'll wake tomorrow to the same family, the same house, the same story, and still she smiles because that's what she does. She remembers, even when she's supposed to forget. Meg Griffin exists in the quiet margins of Quahog, suspended between visibility and disappearance. She is there in every episode, sitting at the table waiting to be spoken to. But somehow she remains unacknowledged, a shadow among louder personalities. The cruel running joke of Family Guy is that Meg is invisible in plain sight. Everyone sees her, but no one truly looks at her. The town, her family, even the narrative itself treat her like background noise, an echo of teenage awkwardness that never matures into a full voice. In most worlds, that would make her tragic. But in the strange emotional logic of Family Guy, her invisibility becomes almost cosmic. She exists in a parallel universe of neglect, a dimension of silence that hums beneath the chaos. When Peter mocks her, when Lois ignores her, when Chris barely notices her, something deeper happens. She drifts a little further from reality, slipping into that outer orbit of the story where time slows down. It's lonely, yes, but there's peace in it, too. She's the only one not bound by the constant noise of attention. If you imagine Quahog as a stage, Meg is the only actor standing in the dim corner, lit by the faintest glow. She doesn't move much. She doesn't get the punchline, but she sees everything. She watches the family's manic rhythm unfold day after day, her face calm, her eyes taut. Over time, she becomes a kind of observer, a silent witness to the absurdities that everyone else has forgotten by morning. When the world resets, she doesn't seem surprised. She's already used to being left behind. There are moments, though, when the silence breaks, rare episodes where Meg finds her voice. She yells, fights back, or demands to be seen. And for a brief instant the illusion cracks. The world reacts to her anger with confusion, almost alarm, as if the fabric of Quahog itself wasn't built to handle Meg speaking out loud. It always resets quickly afterward, restoring her to her muted existence. The silence returns. But each outburst leaves a small trace, a kind of emotional fingerprint that lingers. The writers have occasionally turned that invisibility into humor. But it has a strange side effect. It gives Meg a rare kind of depth. In a universe where everyone else forgets, her pain is the only consistent emotional note. It never gets reserved, never heals, never disappears. That unchanging sadness becomes its own kind of immortality. She suffers perpetually, but that suffering gives her something no one else in Quahog seems to have. A soul that remembers. It's almost as though Meg exists in a different layer of time. Her world is quieter, slower, slightly detached from the bright chaos around her. When the others argue or shout or break into song, she sits still. She waits. She endures. There's something ancient about that patience, something that borders on serenity. The joke about her being ignored has lasted so long it has turned into something meditative, like watching someone trapped in stillness who has learned to breathe within it. Sometimes you can feel that quiet energy radiating from her. The camera pans across the Griffin living room, everyone talking at once, and there's Meg. Barely moving, barely speaking. The silence around her grows soft and dense. You can almost hear it. In that silence, she's not just the forgotten daughter. She's the unspoken part of the story, the still water beneath the noise. Meg Griffin's universe is small, but it's infinite in its repetition. She lives each day knowing she will be unseen, unheard, uncelebrated, and yet she keeps showing up. She keeps eating breakfast, she keeps walking home from school, she keeps existing quietly at the edge of the screen, and maybe that's what makes her beautiful in her own strange way. While everyone else shatters and resets, Meg remains constant. The still point in an endless storm of absurdity, the soft invisible gravity holding the Griffin family together, even when no one notices. Stewie Griffin lives inside a parody. He is a baby, but he speaks like a scholar. He is a child, but he remembers entire lifetimes of intellect, regret, and cosmic boredom. He builds machines that bend time, yet cannot reach the height of a kitchen counter. He is forever 1 year old, yet older than anyone else in the house by virtue of his awareness. This tension between physical infancy and intellectual eternity is the source of both the comedy and the quiet melancholy that define him. Stewie is not merely frozen in time, he is trapped in it. Each episode begins with the same illusion. He sits in his high chair, spoon in hand, voice sharp, British, precise. Around him, the world treats him as a harmless infant, barely sentient, incapable of words. Only Brian seems to understand him fully, though even that connection drifts in and out depending on those episodes' needs. And so Stewie lives with a mind too vast for his cage, a consciousness that can imagine universes but cannot walk down the stairs without help. He is the most intelligent being in Quahog, and also the most helpless. At first, his character was defined by malice. Early Stewie was a caricature of megalomania, a miniature Bond villain plotting matricide between bottles of formula. But over time, that ambition softened. His weapons became toys, his threats became jokes. Somewhere along the way, the rage melted into melancholy. The villain became a philosopher. He still invents, still schemes, still mocks the world around him. But there's a new undertone in his voice now, something wistful, something that feels like longing. It's as if he knows he's been alive for decades, yet never allowed to grow. This unending infancy gives him a strange immortality, and he experiences countless adventures, time travel, alternate dimensions, even death. And yet he returns unaged, unmarked. Each season erases his progress, but not entirely his awareness. Sometimes he hints at remembering too much, references to past escapades that no one else recalls, moments of quiet reflection that seem too wise for a baby. He might laugh it off, but deep down, Stewie knows he's stuck in a closed loop, a cosmic crib where nothing truly ends. That's the haunting beauty of him. Beneath the cleverness and cruelty, there's the ache of someone who understands eternity far too young. Imagine having the curiosity of a scientist, the vocabulary of a playwright, and the limitations of an infant's body. You would either lose your mind or build a time machine. And he does both in his own way. His gadgets, his experiments, his desperate flights into the past and future, they're all just ways of trying to outrun the inevitability of his stasis. But every journey, no matter how far, leads back to the same nursery, the same crib, the same unchanging morning sunlight spilling across the wall. In a world built on repetition, Stewie is the only one who truly feels the weight of it. Peter laughs, Lois sighs, Meg endures, but Stewie knows. He understands that the calendar doesn't move, that the clock doesn't tick, that he is an idea suspended in perpetual animation. Sometimes he seems to accept it, even joke about it. Other times you can sense the exhaustion behind his bravado. It's the exhaustion of a consciousness trapped inside a form that will never catch up. There's something almost peaceful in imagining Stewie like that. Half genius, half dream, reclining in his crib while the universe loops endlessly around him. Every episode he wakes to the same morning. The same bottle, the same world waiting for another of his inventions. And though he can bend time, he can never escape it. His life is a quiet infinity lived behind the bars of a nursery that never changes. And perhaps that's the ultimate irony. For all his brilliance, all rebellion, all his attempts to control fate, Stewie Griffin's greatest invention was not a machine at all, but endurance. The ability to keep thinking, keep plotting, keep existing, in a world that will never let him grow up. Brian Griffin walks through Quahog like a ghost who hasn't yet realized he's dead. He drinks, he writes, he argues, he falls in and out of love, and yet there's always something weightless about him, as if he's half present, half somewhere else entirely. He's a dog, yes, but he's also the most human character on the show, which makes his existence quietly tragic. His paws hold martinis, his voice carries wit, and his soul, if such a thing can exist in an animated dog, seems constantly adrift between irony and longing. In the early seasons, Brian was the show's conscience, the calm observer among chaos. While Peter smashed through walls and Lois held the house together, Brian stood aside, cigarette in hand, narrating with dry detachment. He was the audience's anchor, the only one who seemed to know how absurd everything truly was. But over time, that clarity blurred. His wisdom became cynicism. His charm curdled into arrogance. His self-awareness turned against him. Watching Brian evolve is like watching someone slowly lose faith in their own narrative purpose. The show lets him drift. One episode, he's a novelist. The next, he's homeless. One week, he's a liberal intellectual debating moral philosophy. The next, he's stumbling drunk through heartbreak. Each reset wipes the slate clean, but some echo remains. You can hear it in his tone, a weariness, a slight hesitation before he delivers a sarcastic line. He remembers more than he should. He's caught in the same repeating world as everyone else, but unlike them, he knows it. That's his burden, awareness without escape. Brian's shifting soul mirrors the show's own tonal restlessness. He is the vessel for its changing moods. Satire one day, sentimentality the next, absurdism the day after. He can belong to any genre the story needs. Romantic-led, tragic friend, comic relief, philosopher, martyr, every role fits and none of them last. He's constantly rewritten, yet somehow always recognizable. His identity stretches, folds, and reshapes itself with the same elasticity that governs Quahog's physics. And still, underneath every version of him, there's that faint trace of sadness. Perhaps his most haunting moment came when the show killed him. The car, the shock, the grief that followed, it all felt heavier than anything Family Guy had attempted before. For a brief moment, the illusion cracked, the laughter stopped, the audience mourned, and then, through the magic of narrative reversal, Brian returned. The show healed itself, just as it always does. But something subtle changed. After that, even when he laughed, there was a new softness in him, a quiet ghostliness. The knowledge of having died and come back. Few characters in sitcom history have lived through their own eulogy. Brian did, and he carries that weight gently, forever unspoken. His relationship with Stewie reveals the most human part of him. Their friendship is both comedic and profoundly existential. Two beings aware of the loop, coping with it in opposite ways. Stewie rages against his confinement. Brian numbs himself to it. Together they form the show's reflective core, the part that dreams beyond the jokes. When they travel through time, Brian is never amazed by what he sees. He's haunted by it, because he knows it won't last. The timeline will fold again and he'll return to the same living room, the same leash, the same glass of wine half finished on the counter. Brian Griffin is a portrait of modern disillusionment, drawn in fur and sarcasm, a creature who has everything: intelligence, speech, companionship, and yet feels perpetually lost. He wants meaning, but he lives in a universe that resets before meaning can take root. So he keeps talking, keeps writing, keeps drinking, hoping that words might leave a mark even if time won't. And maybe that's why we keep watching him. Because beneath the clever lines and ironic detachment, there's something achingly human about Brian's confusion. He's trying to live authentically in a world that doesn't allow it. He's trying to be more than a joke in a story that keeps erasing him. And though he fails, he keeps trying. That persistence, quiet, tired, but real, is what gives his shifting soul its fragile beauty. Family Guy has always presented itself as a comedy about one ordinary American family living in one ordinary American town, but when you look closer, the idea of the American dream in Quahog doesn't function as a goal or even a belief. It's simply part of the background noise, like the hum of a refrigerator that no one notices until the power goes out. The Griffin family's suburban life is a parody of prosperity. A house they can somehow afford, a car that always runs again after every crash, food that fills the fridge even when Peter has no job. Everything they need simply exists, appearing as if conjured by the quiet machinery of television logic. It's a dream of middle-class comfort, endlessly renewable and fundamentally hollow. The Griffin home, with its bright siding and simple furniture, represents an older version of the American ideal: stability, family, the image of normalcy. But that normalcy is constantly invaded by absurdity, time travel, celebrity encounters, interdimensional rifts, moments of surreal violence that would shatter any real household. Yet the dream never breaks. The next day, everyone is fine. The structure holds. That's the trick. The American dream in Family Guy doesn't crumble under pressure because it was never real to begin with. It's a soundstage, a painted backdrop that keeps the illusion alive through rooted repetition. Peter embodies the dream's contradiction most clearly. He works an ordinary blue-collar job at a brewery, but his lifestyle fluctuates wildly with the needs of the story. One week he's rich, the next he's bankrupt. The next he's famous, and through it all, nothing changes at home. His dream of success is infinite but meaningless, because success itself resets at the end of every episode. There's no progress, only motion. The treadmill of happiness hums quietly beneath the chaos, keeping everyone in place. Lois represents the moral version of that same dream, the fantasy of perfect composure. She cooks. She forgives. She resets the family's balance every week. Her consistency keeps the illusion of domestic order alive. She's the archetype of the American sitcom mother, but exaggerated until the ideal becomes absurd, even her moments of rebellion. Flirtations, frustrations, bursts of anger are quickly erased, replaced with calm again, as if the world refuses to let her step outside her assigned role. The children, too, reflect the fragments of a dream that's long since broken. Meg's invisibility is the dream's apathy. Chris's confusion is its lack of direction. Stewie's hyper-intelligence is the rebellion of a mind too aware of the illusion it lives inside. Each of them embodies a version of the promise that never quite materialized. They live in a house that always looks fine, but feels faintly artificial, the visual comfort of suburbia masking the quiet absurdity beneath it. Even Quahog itself plays along. The streets, the stores, the schools, every setting is familiar enough to evoke a real American town, yet indistinct enough to belong to any. The show's satire works precisely because the dream it mocks is already hollow. The characters chase meaning, but what they're chasing is background noise. The hum of television comfort, the safety of formula. It's a world where the economy never collapses, where healthcare doesn't exist because no one truly gets sick, where jobs appear and vanish without consequence. It's not a dream you wake from, it's one you drift through indefinitely, and maybe that's the soft, ironic beauty of it all. The American dream in Family Guy isn't a vision of hope or progress. It's a lullaby. One that plays endlessly, soothing you even as it numbs you. It promises that nothing will really change, that every problem can be laughed away, that the lights will always come back on, the bills will always pay themselves, and the house will always be standing when the credits roll. You could call that empty or you could call it peaceful. It depends on how awake you are when you're watching. The cutaway gag is Family Guy's signature, its strange heartbeat, its way of stepping sideways out of time. Every few minutes, the story pauses, reality bends, and the show slips through a door into another dimension, one that exists only for a few seconds, only to vanish again. A character says, "This is worse than the time I..." And suddenly the fabric of Quahog tears open. You fall into another world. It might be ancient Rome, or a Hollywood set, or some bizarre alternate history where Peter is the president and Stewie is a god. Then, just as abruptly, the door closes and you're back in the living room as if nothing happened. Its comedy is quantum travel. Tiny disposable worlds that flicker into existence, serve a single joke, and dissolve. But if you watch long enough, if you imagine each cutaway not as a random gag but as a glimpse into something real, a strange picture begins to form. Each cutaway feels like a shard of a larger, fractured universe, a place that continues to exist even after the screen cuts back. Somewhere in a parallel timeline, that version of Peter is still trapped in a 1970s disco. That version of Lois is still dancing in a jazz club. That version of Brian is still narrating noir monologues to a dimly lit street. The show never confirms it, but it's easy to believe that every joke opens a door to a new, self-contained reality that keeps going when we're not watching. This is what makes the cutaway format so hypnotic. It's not just humor, it's metaphysics. A form of creative entropy where the universe constantly splinters and reforms. The cutaways give the illusion that Quahog is part of an infinite multiverse of possible Family Guys, each one slightly altered, each one as real as the next. It's as though Peter's imagination, or perhaps the show's collective memory, can't hold still. It keeps bleeding into other dimensions. Sometimes the cutaways contradict each other. The same historical event reappears differently in later episodes. The same celebrity behaves differently. The same past is rewritten over and over. And yet, none of it feels wrong. It's as if the show is acknowledging something quietly profound. That memory, like comedy, is fluid. That truth bends to the needs of the moment. That in this strange animated cosmos, every possibility exists simultaneously. There's also something deeply relaxing about that structure. The unpredictability becomes familiar, like waves against a shore. You expect the rhythm, dialogue, setup, sudden cut, laughter, return. Each cutaway is a small dream, nested inside the larger one. The joke might be absurd, even chaotic, but the form itself becomes soothing. It reassures you that you're safe within the pattern, that no matter how far the joke wanders, it will always return to Quahog, to the couch, to the next scene. If you think of Family Guy as a universe, then the cutaways are its galaxies, brief flashes of light scattered across the void, each one born, lived, and gone in an instant. And yet, they give the world its texture, its sense of infinity. Without them, Quahog would be too closed, too consistent. The cutaways remind us that this world, like all imagined worlds, is porous. That reality here is not a line but a cloud. Sometimes you can almost feel the invisible fabric between the main story and the cutaway worlds, stretching and pulsing like the skin of a dream. Maybe the characters don't travel consciously, but some part of their mind seems to wander there. Maybe Peter doesn't just imagine those moments, maybe he remembers them. Maybe he's lived 1,000 alternate lives and the show's humor is simply the language of his fragmented memory. And when you think of it that way, the cutaways stop being random jokes. They become glimpses of infinity, brief, glittering fragments of other timelines, each one flickering in the soft glow of television light. And just like dreams, they vanish when you wake, leaving only the faint impression that something larger, stranger, and slightly more beautiful might be waiting behind the next laugh. The laws of the universe in Family Guy don't behave like the laws of any real world. They bend, twist, and snap back into place with a gentle elasticity that keeps the chaos clean. Peter can fall off a cliff, explode, or get crushed under a piano, and yet by the next scene he's perfectly fine. Beer in hand, no scar, no memory of pain. The characters move through a dimension where physics has the consistency of a dream. Gravity exists only when it's funny. Death exists only until the next punchline. It's not just a cartoon convenience, it's a philosophy. A strange, comforting belief that nothing bad lasts, that all suffering can be erased by laughter. In Quahog, injury is comedy, not consequence. The impact of an accident becomes a rhythm, a visual gag, a familiar music cue. The body bends and recovers instantly. There are no hospitals, no real recovery arcs. Reality simply decides to start over. The show uses this mechanic so casually that you stop noticing it. But underneath, it reveals something deep about the tone of Family Guy. It's a world that refuses permanence. It runs on the principle that consequence is an illusion, and morality resets as easily as broken bones. That same logic applies to emotion. Every betrayal, every confession, every heartbreak is temporary. 1 week, characters face existential despair. The next, they're back at breakfast smiling as if nothing happened. In most shows, that would feel cheap. But here it's part of the rhythm. Family Guy is a self-repairing organism. Every moral arc bends back toward neutrality. The world is designed to forgive itself endlessly. There's something oddly tranquil about that. The chaos never sticks. The slate is wiped clean again and again, giving the viewer the comfort of infinite do-overs. It mirrors the subconscious dream of everyone watching, the wish that every mistake could be undone, every embarrassment erased, every wound instantly healed. When Peter crashes through his roof or Stewie vaporizes a neighbor, the humor lies not in destruction but in the certainty of recovery. We laugh not because it's violent, but because it's safe. We know no one will stay hurt for long. This looping forgiveness creates a world without moral memory. Actions happen, but they don't echo. Peter can commit crimes, Meg can suffer, Lois can rage, and Brian can drown in regret, yet the next episode always offers absolution through forgetfulness. The moral compass of Family Guy isn't broken. It's constantly recalibrated to zero. It's as if the universe itself refuses to judge, preferring to keep the laughter going rather than let guilt settle in. That, in a way, makes Quag one of the most merciful fictional worlds ever built. No matter how terrible the mistake, the story will quietly fold it away, smoothing the edges until everything feels calm again. Even death, the ultimate rule of physics, is just a suggestion here. Characters die often, but it never lasts. The afterlife, like the show's moral system, is just another setting. You can visit it, joke about it, and then return for dinner. It's easy to see why this structure is so strangely soothing. In a real world where consequences linger and mistakes echo for years, Family Guy's physics of impermanence feels like a fantasy of freedom. It whispers, you can always start over, you can always laugh it off. Nothing truly breaks. That message might be absurd, but it's comforting in the same way reruns are comforting. You know how it ends, and that safety lets you relax. Every crash, every explosion, every impossible recovery is a visual lullaby. A gentle reminder that in this world, gravity is optional. Morality is flexible, and every fall is followed by laughter and light. The pain fades instantly, the music returns, and the Griffin family carries on as if the laws of consequence have been politely suspended for the sake of another joke. And maybe that's why the show never feels heavy, no matter how dark the humor becomes. Because under the absurdity, the physics of Family Guy are secretly kind. Nothing is final. Nothing is fatal. The universe always forgives itself, and everyone in it gets to wake up unharmed. If you look long enough, beneath the surface chaos of Family Guy, patterns begin to appear, small consistent threads that quietly connect the decades of absurdity. Most people think of the show as random, a whirlpool of gags and resets. But somewhere under that noise there's an invisible order. It's not the kind of order that's written down or consciously designed. It feels more like a subconscious rhythm, something that the show itself remembers even when its characters don't. These are the hidden consistencies, the recurring glimmers that remind you Quag might be more connected than it seems. The most obvious consistencies are visual. The Griffin house never changes shape, but neither do most of the homes on Spooner Street. The angles of the town remain the same from season 1 to season 23. There's a comfort in that repetition, like an architectural heartbeat. The same telephone poles, the same corner store, the same background extras, passing through frame after frame. Even when animation styles evolve and colors brighten, the skeleton of the town remains intact. Quag remembers its outline, even as it forgets its stories. Then there are the deeper, subtler patterns, the ones that exist not in scenery but in tone. For example, every few seasons the show returns to a quiet moral truth. That Peter, for all his chaos, loves his family in his own crude way. The sentiment never lasts long, but it always returns. Likewise, Stewie's relationship with Brian is forever rewritten, yet it always finds its way back to melancholy friendship. Lois always forgives, Meg always endures, Chris always drifts between confusion and calm. It's as though the characters are magnets pulled back to the same positions after every disruption. There's something almost cosmic about that structure. Family Guy behaves like a universe governed by soft constants, rules of emotion that reassert themselves even when the plot doesn't. The episodes might contradict each other, but the feeling of each relationship stays the same. That's why the show never feels completely random, even when it looks that way. The emotional architecture holds. You could watch a season from 2004 and one from 2024 back to back, and it would feel like one long, slightly surreal dream that refuses to age. Some consistencies are more secret, small details that the animators or writers seem to leave like breadcrumbs. A recurring prop in the background, a reused minor character who appears decades apart without explanation. A pattern in the episode titles quietly echoing earlier ones. These are the fingerprints of a long-running dream, traces of memory that never fully fade. And then there are the consistencies of absence, the jokes that never die, the characters who never grow, the unanswered questions that hang suspended over time, never resolved, yet never forgotten. What happened to certain side characters who vanished without warning? Why do some episodes seem to remember events that were supposedly erased? These quiet mysteries give Family Guy its strange continuity, not one of plot, but of mood. Even chaos, when repeated long enough, becomes order. The randomness becomes ritual. A car crash, a cutaway, a cruel joke, a musical number. Over the years, these elements form a pattern like the drumbeat of a dream you can't quite wake from. The repetition is hypnotic, familiar, comforting. You start to expect the rhythm, and the rhythm never disappoints. That's the paradox of Family Guy. Its continuity is invisible, but it's always there. The show pretends to forget, yet it remembers in ways that aren't logical, only emotional. Every running gag, every half-referenced event, every reset timeline quietly builds a tapestry that you feel more than you understand. It's not the kind of consistency you can chart on paper. It's the kind that hums just below. Awareness, keeping everything tethered. So while Quog resets again and again, its heart doesn't. Beneath the laughter and absurdity, the same pulse keeps time. You can feel it if you listen closely, a soft, familiar rhythm echoing through 25 years of animation, holding all the fragments together, whispering the same story in endless variations. And maybe that's the secret comfort of it all. In a world that forgets everything, Family Guy still remembers enough to feel like home. There are moments in Family Guy where the absurdity becomes so precise, so vivid, that it turns symbolic without meaning to. The Peter Copter is one of those moments, a creation so bizarre and specific that it transcends the joke it was written for. On the surface, it's a simple gag. Peter builds a helicopter out of parts and paints his face on the front. But if you sit with it, as you might with any recurring dream, it begins to take on a strange poetry. The Peter Copter isn't just a vehicle, it's a declaration, a floating monument to Peter's self-contained world, a machine that lets him rise above Quahog only to crash back down into it moments later. Every few seasons, a new version of the same idea appears. A car shaped like Peter, a robot named Peter, an invention that bears his grin and his chaos. The joke repeats because it represents something deeper in the rhythm of the show, Peter's need to construct himself outside himself, to replicate his existence in a new, louder form. It's the instinct of a man who's always aware, somewhere inside, that he doesn't last from week to week, so he builds copies, flying, walking, talking duplicates of his own identity, all doomed to self-destruction. The Peter Copter crashes almost immediately, of course. It always does. That's part of the ritual. It's born, it flies, it burns, but the next time Peter builds something ridiculous, you realize it wasn't just a one-time failure. It's his way of touching infinity. He keeps making impossible things because creation itself is his only real continuity. In a world that resets every week, invention becomes the closest thing to legacy. There's a pattern to it. Invention, chaos, collapse, reset. The Peter Copter is joined by other strange machines, the Hinden Peter, the Peter Boat, the Pterodactyl costume, even his cloned versions in later episodes. Each one is a physical echo of the same impulse. The urge to leave a mark in a universe that refuses to keep records. It's comical, yes, but also faintly existential. Peter builds because he knows, without knowing, that the world will forget. In that way, the Peter Copter becomes the perfect emblem of Family Guy's internal logic. It soars on laughter and crashes in absurdity, yet it always reappears in spirit. Its wreckage is never shown for long. The fire goes out, the smoke clears, and Quahog resets again. But you remember the image, the spinning blades, the grin painted across the metal, the ridiculous confidence that it could ever stay in the air. And maybe deep down, the Peter Copter is more than just a joke about a man who shouldn't be allowed near machinery. It's a symbol of Quahog itself, a world that keeps inventing, destroying, and rebuilding itself endlessly. A dream that flies too high, falls, and then quietly starts over again, unchanged but undeterred. When Peter climbs into his strange machines, you can almost hear the faint hum of that endless cycle, the same optimism, the same chaos, the same inevitability. He looks proud for a moment, his childish grin filling the cockpit, his voice booming with confidence. For a second, it almost seems like he might make it this time. But then the ground rushes up and the laughter follows. The machine crashes, the dream resets. By the next episode, the wreckage is gone. The sky is clear, Peter's back on his couch, flipping channels, the memory of flight already erased. And yet something about that image lingers. The brief, beautiful absurdity of a man soaring through the air in a helicopter that looks exactly like him. The pure, foolish joy of believing, even for a moment, that you can outrun gravity with nothing but enthusiasm and a painted smile. It's nonsense, of course, but it's also strangely tender. Because in Family Guy, every impossible invention, every Peter Copter, every cloned self, every disastrous idea is an act of faith, a belief that even if the world forgets you tomorrow, you can still leave a trail of smoke in the sky tonight. The voice of Stewie Griffin has become one of those rare tunes that exists beyond its own character. An instantly recognizable vibration that somehow feels alive, distinct and self-contained. Yet if you listen closely over the years, you can hear how it has changed, how it's softened, matured, and settled into something almost wistful. When Family Guy began, Stewie's voice was sharp and theatrical, full of clipped consonants and British precision. He spoke like a miniature supervillain reciting Shakespeare through clenched teeth. That early voice was performance, not speech. It was the sound of a baby pretending to be an adult. But as the seasons passed, something happened. The edges rounded, the accent thinned, the menace faded. What replaced it was something gentler, quieter, and far more human. In the early days, Stewie's tone was parody. He was a lampoon of intelligence, of villainy, of all things British and grandiose. His inflection carried authority, control, ego. When he threatened to build a mind control device or destroy Lois, his words were crisp, deliberate, and cold. But beneath the comedy, there was already a tension. The voice was too refined for his age, too rehearsed, too distant from the chaos of Quahog. It made him feel alien, detached, an outsider in his own family. The humor worked because it was absurd, a baby speaking like a Bond antagonist trapped in a playpen. Yet over time, that voice began to lose its armor. Somewhere between the show's early reboots and its middle seasons, the Britishness softened. The delivery became more conversational. The theatrical villain disappeared, replaced by something closer to irony. A dry, knowing tone that still carried intelligence, but also fatigue. You can almost track the emotional evolution of Stewie through his pitch alone. The voice grew less about domination and more about observation. Less about conquering the world and more about coping with it. That transition marked a quiet emotional arc for Stewie, one that most viewers didn't notice consciously but felt nonetheless. The exaggerated voice of a mad genius transformed into the weary cadence of someone who'd seen too much. His accent still lingered, but it became the ghost of an affectation. A leftover from a version of himself he no longer fully believed in. The baby dictator became a philosopher. His voice, once weaponized with ego, began to tremble with humor, curiosity, and a strange, almost unspoken sadness. It's as if Stewie's voice aged while his body didn't. Each season, the words carried a bit more reflection, a bit less arrogance. The sharp R's blurred into softer syllables. The rhythm slowed. The pauses lengthened. The character's mind matured even as his form remained unchanged. Through nothing more than tone, the performance began to express what Family Guy rarely says outright, that Stewie is conscious of his own timelessness. He's aware, at least subconsciously, that he's been speaking the same lines for decades, stuck in the same nursery, trapped in the same loop. The fading of his accent is like the erosion of pretense, a baby slowly becoming more real while remaining trapped in fiction. The irony, of course, is that this evolution mirrors the audience's own relationship with the show. When Family Guy began, its humor was loud, brash, absurd. As the years passed, it became self-aware, even introspective at times. The change in Stewie's voice became the sound of that transformation, the soft calibration between chaos and thoughtfulness. And if you listen now in the later seasons, you can hear both voices coexisting. The old theatricality flickering through moments of nostalgia, the newer warmth carrying through scenes of friendship and melancholy. He still calls Brian an idiot, still builds impossible device, still slips into megalomania when it suits him. But behind the humor there's a voice that feels tired in a gentle human way, the sound of someone who has stopped pretending to be a villain and started simply being aware. It's remarkable, really, that something as simple as tone can hold such history. You could close your eyes, hear Stewie speak, and know immediately which era you're in. Not because the jokes have changed, but because his voice carries time in it. Decades of slow evolution. Countless resets, endless mornings in the same crib. Stewie, Griffin's voice began as a joke and became a biography, a chronicle of growth that defies his eternal infancy. It's the voice of a child pretending to be an adult who, over time, became one anyway, even though the mirror never changed. If Quahog is a drifting dream and Peter its restless current, then Lois Griffin is the anchor, heavy enough to steady the chaos, quiet enough to be overlooked. Her presence in Family Guy is the calm beneath the storm, the voice that brings everything back to ordinary life after the absurdity has burned itself out. She exists in that rare territory between awareness and surrender, a person who seems to know that her world makes no sense but chooses to hold it together anyway. Every joke, every disaster, every surreal interruption passes through her orbit, and somehow, by the end, the family still stands. Her role began, like many sitcom mothers before her, as the voice of reason. The patient wife, the moral compass, the person who sees the flaws in others and corrects them with affection. But Lois, over time, became something more interesting, something quietly cosmic. She's the only one who truly absorbs consequence, even when consequence doesn't exist. When Peter destroys the house, Lois rebuilds it. When Stewie plots chaos, she grounds it. When Meg vanishes into neglect, Lois's brief flickers of concern become the only proof that someone in Quahog can still feel guilt. She holds the shape of the family in her memory even when the universe forgets. In a world where time resets, Lois carries continuity in her demeanor. Her frustration never fully fades. It accumulates in tiny tones of voice, small gestures, sighs that seem to come from somewhere older than the story. The way she says Peter isn't just exasperation, it's history. Decades of impossible forgiveness condensed into one soft syllable. She has endured every catastrophe the show has ever imagined, and she still manages to fold laundry, set the table, and smile through it all. It's the kind of endurance that feels superhuman, and perhaps it is. There's a rhythm to her patience. When the story unravels, she waits. When Peter's logic collapses, she breathes. She knows, in some way the others don't, that everything will reset, that her anger will dissolve, that her calm will return. She doesn't resist it anymore. That quiet acceptance gives her a strange serenity, as though she's made peace with the fact that she lives inside a loop. The chaos doesn't break her because she's learned how to float through it, like a stone resting in the middle of a current. But there are moments when that calmness cracks, small flashes where Lois seems aware of her own confinement. An episode where she dreams of other lives, other identities. A brief montage where she remembers her youth, her ambitions, her sense of individuality before becoming the gravitational center of a sitcom. Those moments don't last, but they're telling. They reveal that her patience isn't ignorance, it's choice. She chooses to be the stable one because someone has to be. If Quahog is a dream, Lois is the part of the dream that insists on staying coherent. Even her voice carries this balance. Warm, controlled, just slightly weary, the tone of someone who has accepted both the madness and the love that define her family. She never fully escapes into despair or cynicism. She lives somewhere in between, in the quiet middle ground where care still exists, even if it's futile. She knows she can't fix Peter or change Stewie or save Meg from invisibility, but she keeps showing up anyway. Every morning, every meal, every punchline. You can feel the emotional architecture of Family Guy resting on her shoulders. Without Lois, the family would simply float away into nonsense, too chaotic to survive a single week. Her presence gives shape to the show's infinite loop. She keeps the center intact, not through power or control, but through quiet endurance. She anchors the impossible with something as simple as love, the soft, unspoken kind that doesn't fix anything but still holds everything in place. When you watch her standing in the kitchen, one hand on her hip, a faint smile on her face while Peter does something unthinkable again. There's something almost sacred about it. She's the still point in a spinning universe, the thread that ties the dream together. She doesn't fight the absurdity anymore. She just steadies it. And maybe that's why she feels so real, because she embodies the kind of grace that exists not in grand gestures but in repetition. Lois Griffin never truly changes, yet she never stops carrying everyone else's change for them. In that way, she's not just the mother of a family. She's the heartbeat of an entire fictional world, keeping time even when no one else remembers the rhythm. Chris Griffin exists in the quiet, hazy middle of everything. Not invisible like Meg, not chaotic like Peter, not self-aware like Stewie, just suspended somewhere in between, a soft echo of adolescence that never quite resolves into adulthood. He is the forgotten middle child of Quahog and of Family Guy itself. A character who drifts like fog between importance and background, always present, rarely noticed, eternally unchanged. His world is simpler, slower, and faintly out of focus, as if he's been written in pencil while everyone else is drawn in ink. There's a peculiar tenderness in that Chris is the embodiment of innocence that refuses to grow up. He has no grand ambitions, owns no existential awareness, no consistent understanding of the chaos around him. He just is. He goes to school, he eats cereal, he laughs at things that don't quite make sense. Sometimes he surprises you with sudden wisdom, a sentence that seems to come from nowhere, as if the simplicity of his mind has granted him brief access to truth. And then he returns to silence, fading back into the hum of background life. The show uses him sparingly, almost like a musical rest between louder notes. His moments are pauses, breaths in the rhythm of Quahog's madness. When Peter's recklessness and Stewie's inventions pull the world apart, Chris remains steady. His slowness is grounding. His confusion is sincere. He doesn't resist the absurdity. He simply lets it pass through him. There's something deeply human in that acceptance. He doesn't need to understand everything to survive it. He just shows up, open and unguarded, letting the world happen. Every so often, the writers give Chris an episode of his own, a glimpse into his world. You see his room, messy, small, but filled with strange drawings and pieces of himself. His art, his quiet fascination with the odd. His bond with Herbert that's played for humor but hides something more complicated. A portrait of loneliness wearing a smile. Chris's stories often end where they began, but they leave traces, little moments of sweetness and sadness that linger longer than the punchlines. He's the show's gentlest mirror, reflecting the world's cruelty without adding to it. His relationship with Peter is particularly revealing. Peter sees him as a simpler version of himself, an extension of his own boyishness, but Chris's heart is pure, his humor softer, his anger rare. Where Peter reacts, Chris absorbs. When Peter destroys, Chris forgives. He doesn't compete for attention because he doesn't seem to need it. In a family that screams for recognition in every direction, Chris's silence becomes its own kind of strength. He holds the middle of the family dynamic without ever announcing it. You can feel how time forgets him. The other characters evolve, or at least pretend to, but Chris remains the same age, the same shape, the same lost teenager. His hair never changes, his voice wavers but never deepens, his body remains frozen-moaned in awkward adolescence. It's as though he's trapped in the longest summer of his life, walking the same route to school forever. That eternal adolescence gives his character a strange, haunting quality. He's a boy who will never grow old, yet also never escape the loneliness of being overlooked. And still, there's something serene about him. While everyone else in Family Guy is caught in loops of ego, chaos, or pain, Chris drifts through it with a kind of gentle neutrality. He doesn't resent his place, he simply accepts it. He finds small joys where others find crises. His laughter, when it comes, feels honest, untainted by irony. In a show built on exaggeration, Chris's simplicity becomes an act of quiet rebellion. Sometimes when you watch him staring out the window, half listening to his family argue in the background, you can sense a deeper awareness in him, an unspoken understanding that the noise will never stop, that the world around him will keep looping forever, and that his job is simply to stand still and let it. That's why he feels so peaceful. He's not trying to fix the dream, he's just living in it. Chris Griffin may be forgotten, but he's also untouchable. He's the steady hum between chaos and silence, the soft middle note in Quahog's endless song. The family may forget him, the story may overlook him, but he remains the quiet proof that even in absurdity there's room for stillness. There was one week in the long, looping dream of Family Guy when the world actually stopped. A week when Quahog, for once, did not reset cleanly, when laughter caught in its throat, when Brian Griffin, the family's voice of reason, cynic, poet, and stray philosopher, died. It was meant to be a twist, a shock, a moment of gravity in a world that never holds weight. And for that single week in 2013, the show broke its own rule. It let something matter. The scene was brutal in its simplicity. Brian, the talking dog who'd survived gunfights, time travel, and the limits of morality, was struck by a car. No cosmic accident, no grand narrative, just the kind of random tragedy that the show had always laughed away. Except this time there was no immediate joke. The silence that followed was strange, heavy, uncomfortable. Quahog, usually humming with sarcasm, felt eerily still. Peter and Lois stood over the wreckage. Stewie, for the first time in his existence, looked helpless. The absurdity of the moment only deepened the grief. Because Brian wasn't just another character. He was the only one who seemed to know that this world wasn't real. For a moment, the show stepped outside of itself. The illusion of consequence became tangible. Viewers grieved, not for a dog, but for the part of the show that felt most human. Brian's voice had always been the filter through which Family Guy saw itself. His sarcasm was self-awareness, his exhaustion was empathy, his pretentiousness was the show's conscience mocking itself. Losing him felt like losing the show's ability to reflect. Then, after one strange, suspended week, the universe bent again. Stewie, consumed by grief, built a time machine. He reversed the moment. Reality folded backward. Brian returned, whole, unscarred, sipping wine like nothing had happened. The timeline healed itself, and everything was fine again. Or so the show said. But something stayed behind in the silence of that reboot. Even as jokes resumed, there was a faint ghost of loss still clinging to the edges of Quahog, like smoke that refuses to fade. When Brian returned, his tone subtly changed. The detachment grew warmer. The sarcasm softened. The exhaustion, once comedic, became something more human. He'd become, in the show's odd metaphysical logic, a resurrected being. A character aware, at least subconsciously, that he had crossed a threshold and come back. From then on, every line carried an echo, every laugh had a tremor. It's as if he remembered the moment of his own absence, even though no one else did that. Death and resurrection became a quiet symbol for the entire show's existence. Family Guy itself dies and returns constantly. Cancelled, revived, rebooted, renewed. It mirrors Brian's arc perfectly. The universe collapses, rebuilds, and continues as if nothing happened. But each rebirth leaves faint cracks in the illusion. Small reminders that even eternal loops carry scars. The show learned something in that week of grief. That meaning and laughter can coexist. That absurdity can hold sincerity without breaking. You can still see traces of that shift in the episodes that followed. Brian remains witty, flawed, vain. But every so often his voice dips lower. His jokes carry pause. There's a patience to him that wasn't there before, a quiet gratitude for existence, however meaningless. When he sits with Stewie in the twilight of the Griffin backyard, sipping a drink, the air feels softer. He doesn't need to say it, but you can sense it. He remembers. Brian's death didn't just mark an episode. It created a myth within Family Guy's universe, a moment when fiction stumbled into emotion, when the loop of endless comedy momentarily opened and showed its soul. It proved that even a cartoon dog in a world where nothing lasts could brush against eternity. And then, in perfect symmetry, it showed us the comfort of erasure, the gentle mercy of the reset. The car hit him, time reversed, and all was well. But if you listen carefully in the quiet spaces between punchlines, you can still hear it, the faint echo of tires on pavement, the sigh of inevitability, the low hum of a universe that blinked once and came back changed. Every episode of Family Guy contains, hidden somewhere beneath its jokes, another layer of performance, a show within the show. It reveals itself in fragments, through Channel 5 News, through the Pawtucket Patriot Ale commercials, through the anchors, mascots, and talk show parodies that populate Quahog's airwaves. These moments are more than filler. They are the dream's reflection of itself. Quahog watches television constantly, and the images it consumes mirror the same absurdity that defines its world. It's as if the characters are dimly aware they're fictional, so they create their own fiction to keep the illusion alive. Tom Tucker, the perfectly coiffed anchor with his endless self-assurance, speaks every night to an audience that doesn't exist. His son is a human head on a television body, a living metaphor for entertainment's strange anatomy. Together they broadcast the same stories day after day, pointless local events, meaningless tragedies, the weather that never truly changes. The news in Family Guy is an echo chamber of the show's own logic. Consequence-free chaos reported as reality. And because the audience never sees anyone actually watching, it feels eerily recursive, as if the broadcast is being transmitted directly into the dream itself. Then there's the Pawtucket Patriot Ale commercials, where Peter's world of work becomes satire layered upon satire. The brewery functions like a parody of corporate Americana, producing not beer but the idea of beer. Liquid nostalgia wrapped in red, white, and blue labels. Every time we glimpse its interiors, we're watching a copy of a copy, a workplace parody of a parody of the American workplace. Even the mascot, the Jolly Patriot, feels like a hallucination of capitalism's good intentions. The brewery sells identity more than alcohol, and Peter, unwittingly, becomes both the consumer and the product. These shows within the show serve a quiet purpose. They remind you that Family Guy exists inside its own ecosystem of entertainment. The characters consume media that mocks their own lives, never realizing it's all one reflection. Lois watches soap operas that mirror her own domestic melodrama. Brian writes novels that critique the kind of storytelling he's trapped inside. Stewie creates elaborate inventions that resemble television production more than science. The act of watching, creating, and commenting folds in on itself until it becomes a loop. Quahog doesn't just exist as a show. It's a place addicted to its own image. That's the strange genius of it. Every joke about television is also a joke about Family Guy watching itself. When Peter changes the channel, he's not escaping his world, he's cycling through alternate versions of it. The newscasts, the fake ads, the cartoon parodies, they're all windows into parallel Quahogs, miniature reflections that keep the larger illusion spinning. It's a self-sustaining feedback loop, one that's both funny and faintly haunting. If you think of the show as a living dream, then these internal broadcasts are the dream's own dreams, the thoughts it has about itself while it sleeps, each fake commercial, each bizarre local headline, each Channel 5 segment adds another layer of consciousness. They make the world feel bigger by reminding us it's fake. Sometimes the boundary between layers dissolves completely. A cutaway to a television ad bleeds into the main story. A background newscast predicts the next plot twist. A parody sketch lingers too long and becomes the episode itself. The borders of reality and Family Guy are paper-thin, fluttering with every flicker of the screen. It's as though the characters are trapped not in Quahog, but inside a static-filled broadcast that loops forever, rerunning itself until memory and performance become indistinguishable. And yet, there's something peaceful in that recursive design. In a world that knows it's fiction, there's no pressure to be real. The show doesn't fight its own artificiality, it celebrates it. The characters live their lives framed by television screens, framed by jokes about those screens, framed by the very idea of being watched by. They are both the actors and the audience, the punchline and the laugh track. Every night, Tom Tucker smiles into the camera, repeating his line. And that's the way the cookie crumbles. The music swells, the image fades, and somewhere beyond the static, another episode begins. One more layer of fiction added to the dream. Herbert lives at the edge of Quahog, both literally and narratively. His house is always dimly lit, his voice soft, his presence uncomfortable yet strangely tragic. Most people remember him as a punchline, the frail old man whose infatuation with Griffin is played for uneasy laughter. But if you strip away the obvious discomfort of that joke, something else begins to appear beneath it. The ghost of a forgotten life, a portrait of loneliness stretched across decades. Herbert feels like someone who used to belong to the real world before the dream of Family Guy swallowed him whole. His design alone tells you he's out of time. The house looks older than the rest of Quahog. Faded wallpaper, antique furniture, a color palette drawn from another century. His voice creaks with memory. It sounds like it's traveled a long way to reach us. He's part of the town, but not quite in it, a relic wandering through a perpetual present that has no use for the past. In a show where everyone is ageless, Herbert's aging is jarring. He's the only visible sign that time might exist here after all. There are brief moments, tiny lines, passing glances when Herbert hints at a life before Quahog's endless loop, mentions of his service in World War II, his injuries, his lost youth. The details are scattered and inconsistent, as if even his memories are fading. Sometimes he sings old songs under his breath, melodies that don't belong to this world of cutaways and chaos. Those songs are fragments of a reality that once obeyed time. They make him feel like a ghost trapped inside a cartoon that doesn't remember him. What makes Herbert haunting isn't his behavior, it's his persistence. The show reuses him again and again, yet he never evolves, never learns, never escapes his fixation. That's part of the discomfort. He's frozen in a single emotional loop. But beneath that stillness, you can sense the remnants of a man who once loved deeply, lost everything, and never recovered. The unsettling nature of his character becomes a metaphor for grief that has nowhere to go. In Quahog, trauma doesn't heal, it simply becomes part of the background humor. Herbert laughs, but his laughter always sounds tired, almost hollow. Every interaction he has is tinted with nostalgia. He remembers wars that no one else mentions, loves that no one else believes existed. His body is frail, but his memory seems eternal. And yet, in a world where memory resets every week, that eternity becomes a curse. He remembers too much. He's the one citizen of Quahog who still carries the weight of time in a place where time doesn't matter. That's why he feels both out of place and essential, because he's the show's only link to mortality. Even the way Herbert moves, slow, trembling, deliberate, feels like resistance. Everyone else in Family Guy lives in a rhythm of slapstick speed, their pain erased as soon as it happens. Herbert lingers. He takes his time. He walks through Quahog as though he's walking through the ruins of something once sacred. His body is a reminder that not everything resets cleanly. Not every soul forgets. There's a strange tenderness hidden inside the show's portrayal of him. Occasionally, a line slips through that feels almost heartbreaking. A mention of his days in the military, of friendships long gone, of a world that used to make sense. He's a tragic figure disguised as comic discomfort. His voice, that thin, reedy drawl, becomes the echo of history calling out to a world that's forgotten what history even is. When you think of Quahog as a dream, Herbert represents the memory that refuses to fade, the one old thought that lingers long after the dreamer has moved on. He hums old songs in the night, waiting by his window for something that will never return. And in those moments, for just a breath, the show feels quiet. The laughter fades, the music slows, and you can almost see him as he truly is. An old man trapped in a loop of time, trying to remember what it felt like to be real. Herbert may be a joke, but he's also a ghost, the only one in Quahog who remembers that the past once existed, and that memory, no matter how absurd, always finds a way to survive the reset. Glenn Quagmire exists like a shadow drawn in neon light. Loud, bright, impossible to miss, and yet concealing something that the show never quite says aloud. To most of Quahog, he's a caricature, a walking embodiment of desire. Every line he speaks is a punchline, every gesture exaggerated, every thought revolving around the same relentless hunger. But if you slow it down, if you look past the noise, you start to see the outline of something quieter underneath. Quagmire's life is built on two planes, the one he performs and the one he can't escape. The performance is the easy part. Giggity echoes like a mantra, his house filled with trophies of pleasure and escapism. A carnival of the superficial. His voice bounces, his energy never fades, his confidence borders on parody. But the more you watch, the clearer it becomes that his excess isn't joy, it's insulation. He's hiding behind speed, behind noise, behind his own reputation. Beneath the surface, there's exhaustion. Every joke about him being unstoppable feels like a man trying to convince himself he still feels alive. The hints of his other self, the second quieter life, slip through when the jokes slow down. There are those rare scenes when Quagmire looks at Peter, Lois, or Brian, and the expression flickers. For just a moment he seems tired, a man who's seen too much, lived too long, and carries memories that the world around him has forgotten. We learn piece by piece that he was once a pilot in the Navy, a professional with discipline and responsibility. The wildness came later. Like a reaction to something breaking, the laughter he carries now feels less like celebration and more like defiance. A refusal to acknowledge the emptiness that waits if he ever stops smiling. He's different from Peter, who destroys without awareness, or Brian, who drowns in reflection. Quagmire lives on the line between them. Aware enough to know his emptiness, but too restless to face it. His jokes about loneliness, aging, and desire always cut a little deeper than they should, like the truth keeps slipping out. When he looks in the mirror, he's not disgusted by what he sees. He's terrified that one day the mirror will stop recognizing him. There are episodes that play his pain for humor. The strained relationship with his father, the rivalry with Brian, the near misses with love that could have grounded him. But beneath those stories lies a repeating rhythm of fear. Quagmire cannot stop performing. Because if he does, he disappears. He doesn't just chase women. He chases proof of existence. Each flirtation, each conquest, each scandal is a way of shouting into the void. I'm still here. His house, cluttered and chaotic, mirrors his mind. Trophies, mementos, photographs, all from lives he's touched and forgotten. It's not the home of a happy man, it's a museum of proof that he once mattered. And yet, every morning, he wakes and puts the mask back on. The rhythm returns, the jokes, the smirk, the confidence that sounds just a little too rehearsed. The audience laughs, but Quagmire's eyes are always slightly ahead of the scene, as if he knows the loop will reset and the silence will follow. That duality makes him one of Quahog's most quietly tragic figures. He understands the absurdity of the world he lives in, but refuses to stop pretending. He has seen the dream behind the dream, the flatness beneath the laughter, and instead of rejecting it, he dives deeper into it. His double life is not secret, it's just invisible, hidden behind the relentless motion of a man who can't afford to stop. And maybe that's why he stays compelling after all these years. Because somewhere inside the endless cycle of jokes and catchphrases, Glenn Quagmire remains aware. He knows this world is made of repetition, and that desire in such a place can never be satisfied. But he keeps chasing anyway. He keeps smiling, keeps speaking, keeps filling the air with noise to drown out the silence that threatens to swallow him when the laughter fades. In that sense, his life isn't indulgence, it's survival. The act of keeping himself awake in a world designed to put everyone else to sleep. And though he'll never admit it, that second life, the quiet, fearful one, is the most human thing about him. Cleveland Brown has always existed in the soft margins of Family Guy, gentle, mild-mannered, a slow voice in a fast world. Where Peter barrels through existence with oblivious enthusiasm, Cleveland drifts. He speaks slowly, reacts carefully, and often pauses long enough for everyone else to forget what they were talking about. That slowness once made him the quiet backbone of Spooner Street. The man who balanced the madness with calm. But then, for a time, he left. The departure wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, like a friend slipping away from a noisy room. And when he returned years later, older in tone but unchanged in form, his absence had given him something rare in Quahog. History. When Cleveland left Family Guy for his own show, The Cleveland Show, it felt at first like a simple spin-off. But narratively it was something stranger, a rupture in the dream. For once, a character stepped out of Quahog's endless reset. He built a new life, found new friends, a new family, even a new rhythm of jokes. He existed in another timeline, one that seemed to move forward, however slowly. And then, when that story ended, he came home. The circle closed, the dream folded back into itself, and Cleveland returned to the same bar stool, the same friends, the same yellow house down the street. But something had shifted. If you listen closely to his voice in those later seasons, there's a faint change, not in pitch, but in weight. He sounds older. Not physically older, but spiritually, as if he's the only one in Quahog who knows what it's like to leave and come back. His humor became slightly more reflective, his patience quieter, his sighs deeper. He'd seen another world, lived another narrative, and somehow remembered it. In a town where even death resets, Cleveland carried continuity. That made him a kind of ghost, too. Not haunting others, but quietly haunted himself. There's a subtle melancholy in the way the show treats his return. His friends welcome him back as though no time has passed, but you can feel the invisible distance between them. Peter hasn't changed. Quagmire hasn't learned. Joe still rants about injustice. Quahog stands still and Cleveland simply re-enters it, carrying years of unspoken memory that no one else acknowledges. He laughs at the same jokes, nods at the same stories, but somewhere in his stillness, there's a trace of sadness. The awareness that home hasn't grown with him. Cleveland's return also mirrors the way Family Guy itself has lived. The show, like him, has been canceled, revived, reimagined, brought back. Both carry the quiet knowledge of having existed outside their own timeline. It gives them a kind of humility. The world laughs the same way, but the laugh track feels older now. You can sense the faint echo of time moving behind the static. What makes Cleveland's story so soothing is that it accepts impermanence. He doesn't rage against the loop, he steps back into it with grace. He knows Quahog will never change, but he still finds comfort in its sameness. His calmness isn't ignorance, it's acceptance. The slow voice, the gentle chuckle, the patient smile. They're the sounds of someone who has learned that stability and stagnation are sometimes the same thing, and that both can feel like home. When he sits at the Drunken Clam again, surrounded by his old friends, you can almost imagine him looking at the room with quiet gratitude. The bar lights flicker, the laughter starts, the conversation resumes. To everyone else, it's just another night. But for Cleveland, it's something deeper, the realization that no matter how far you drift, the dream always lets you back in. He left, and he returned. And that simple rhythm, departure, return, is one of the few true arcs in Family Guy's timeless world. It gives the illusion of movement, of growth, of memory. And though the town itself remains frozen, Cleveland carries a small ember of change inside him. He's proof that even in a universe built on repetition, you can wander off, see something different, and still find your way home. Cleveland's story isn't one of transformation, but of reconciliation. He doesn't fight the loop anymore. He sits within it, content to be both a man who has left and the man who has come back. His voice, slow and steady, becomes the sound of return, the sound of continuity inside a world that forgets everything else. Time is supposed to be meaningless in Family Guy, each episode resetting, each week starting fresh, but Stewie Griffin never fully accepts that. To him, time is a puzzle to be solved, a door to be opened. He's the one resident of Quag who refuses to live inside the dream quietly. His time machines, his paradoxes, his alternate realities, they are all desperate acts of rebellion against the stillness that holds everyone else captive. And through those journeys, the show occasionally reveals something uncanny. The fragile, trembling scaffolding that holds the world together. When Stewie travels through time, the illusion cracks. We see alternate quahogs, broken timelines, futures that contradict themselves, versions of the Griffins that should not exist. One episode shows a world where the family never met Brian. Another reveals a universe of endless Stewies, all slightly different, all fighting for control. These moments don't just serve as science fiction. They expose how unstable this cartoon reality truly is. Time travel is Family Guy's way of glancing at its own seams, the loose threads that connect its loops together. Every time Stewie activates the time machine, the air seems to hum with the weight of things unsaid. The light flashes, the screen fills with motion, and for a moment it feels like the world is remembering itself. You can sense the paradox forming. If Stewie can travel through time, then the show has a timeline. If it has a timeline, then all the resets and reboots might actually be connected, like ripples from a stone that was thrown long ago. Maybe every episode isn't a standalone after all, but a branch of an ever-fracturing tree. Sometimes when he returns from a journey, Stewie looks unsettled, even if the moment is played for humor. You can almost see it in his eyes, the understanding that his reality is unstable, that every action he takes might create or destroy an entire universe that no one else will ever know existed. The rest of the family forgets, of course. They go back to breakfast, to television, to routine. But Stewie remembers. He has seen too many versions of the same day to believe in mornings anymore. Time travel also reveals the show's strange compassion for its own chaos. When Stewie and Brian step into the vortex together, they aren't just partners in adventure. They're pilgrims moving through memory. Every destination, every alternate past or future carries echoes of the main timeline, familiar yet slightly warped. The colors shift, the voices echo differently, the jokes reappear in new forms. It's as if the show is constantly rewriting itself while trying to remember what it used to be. And yet, despite all of Stewie's attempts, he never escapes the loop. No matter how far he goes, every trip ends where it began, back in his room, his crib, his eternal infancy. The universe resets, pretending nothing happened, and time smooths over like undisturbed snow. It's the cruelest kind of infinity, the freedom to move through all of time only to find that every path leads home again. The time machine becomes a metaphor for Family Guy's own existence, a device that explores endless possibilities but always returns to the same starting point, the same yellow house, the same front door. There's a fragile beauty in that repetition. The dream tries to break itself, and in the breaking it finds stability again. Stewie's adventures remind us that the world of Family Guy isn't random. It's cyclical, elastic, always pulling itself back into balance. Every paradox heals itself. Every distortion fades by the next episode. The timeline, though fragile, is also forgiving. Sometimes when you watch those time travel episodes late at night, you can almost feel the gravity of it. The way the music swells as the vortex opens, the way the world shimmers, like it's remembering another version of itself. You start to wonder how many timelines there are, how many invisible variations of Quahog float just outside our sight. Maybe each cutaway, each alternate joke, is a glimpse of one. Stewie will keep trying to master time, of course. He'll rebuild the machine, travel again, lose it again, reset again, but somewhere deep in that endless cycle there's an unspoken truth that time itself isn't broken here. It's simply dreaming. And every time Stewie wakes up in his crib after, of all the impossible things that happen in Quahog, time travel is the one that feels most natural. Stewie's inventions, glinting with cartoon physics and impossible intelligence, are less about science and more about longing, the desire to move through a world that otherwise stands perfectly still. In the endless loop of Family Guy, where no one truly grows older and every consequence dissolves by morning, time travel becomes the only way to measure anything at all. It is movement inside stillness, a ripple across a frozen lake. The first time Stewie builds his time machine, it feels like a gag, a quick joke about ambition. But as the seasons go on, the machine becomes something deeper, almost sacred, a doorway out of repetition. It's the one piece of technology in Family Guy that remembers what happened last time. Every other invention resets or explodes, but the time machine carries continuity between timelines as if it exists just slightly above the world's normal dimension. Each time it hums to life, you can feel the show holding its breath, as though Quahog itself might finally break the illusion of eternal present. And yet, even with infinite possibilities, time in Family Guy never truly changes. When Stewie and Brian travel to the past, the present simply waits for them. When they leap into the future, it's never a future that lasts. Everything folds back. The timeline always repairs itself smoother than before. Their adventures become like dreams within dreams. Fascinating but disposable. It's as if the universe itself refuses to allow permanence. In a strange way, time travel exposes the fragility of the show's own logic. Every attempt to escape only strengthens the cage. When Stewie saves Brian's life by reversing time, the show reveals its secret. Death is reversible, loss is optional, and emotion is temporary. The act of rewinding becomes symbolic. This is a world where nothing can truly move forward because forward doesn't exist. Still, the time travel episodes feel different. They carry weight, melancholy, even tenderness. When Stewie and Brian wander through alternate histories, meeting their younger selves, confronting missed chances, watching civilizations rise and fall, it's as though they're peeking into the machinery of the show itself. They glimpse what change might look like, what consequence might feel like. And for a moment, the loop seems to tremble. but the trembling never lasts. The episode ends, the music fades, the Griffin living room reappears. The time machine sits quietly in Stewie's room, glowing faintly, waiting for another impossible journey. No one else remembers the trips. Only Stewie and Brian carry those invisible miles. They've seen what it means to live with time, and they return to a world that doesn't. That quiet tension gives their friendship its depth, the shared secret that they are both aware of the loop. They've seen it from the outside. They've lived through futures that no one else will ever know. If you listen closely during their later conversations, you can hear the residue of those journeys. A slightly wistful tone, a philosophical aside, a recognition of impermanence disguised as humor. The jokes keep coming. But underneath, the awareness lingers. They know the universe can rewind. They know the story can undo anything. And yet they keep searching for meaning inside it. That's what makes the time travel episode so haunting. They promise change in a world that refuses to change. Consequence in a world that erases consequence. Each trip is a momentary illusion of freedom, followed by the gentle reassertion of fate. It's not tragedy, it's design. The timeline is fragile, but the loop is invincible. You could almost think of Quahog as a living dream that protects itself from awakening. The more you try to break free, the faster it closes around you. Stewie's time machine hums with hope, but hope here is circular. Every line of code leads back to the beginning. Every leap in time ends where it started, in a crib, in a house that never ages, in a world that prefers safety to progress. And maybe that's the secret comfort of Family Guy's time travel. It lets us imagine what change would look like while reassuring us that nothing will actually change. We get the taste of movement, the illusion of consequence, the warmth of a story that could go anywhere, and then, mercifully, the familiar living room returns, the dream resets, the clock never moves. Every so often, the noise of Quahog pauses, and something strange happens. The chaos fades, the laughter softens, and a rhythm begins to rise out of nowhere. The Griffins stop what they're doing. The sky brightens, a brass section swells from the air itself, and suddenly, the entire world turns toward melody. These musical numbers, spontaneous, elaborate, sometimes breathtaking, are Family Guy's most sincere moments. They are the dream's way of singing to itself. From the very first episode, music has been the hidden pulse of Family Guy. Beneath all the cynicism and absurdity, the show has always had the soul of a musical, a world where people burst into song because words aren't enough. The lyrics may be comic, the choreography ridiculous, but there's something hauntingly earnest about them. When Peter, Lois, or even Brian begins to sing, the performance feels older than the show itself, like the echo of 1940s variety acts beamed into modern absurdity. The music numbers rarely make sense in context. They appear without warning and end without explanation, yet somehow they fit perfectly. That's because they operate on a different logic, the emotional logic of memory, not story. They are breaks in the illusion, brief chances for the world to express the things it can't say aloud. In those few shining minutes, Quahog stops being a parody of America and becomes a dream of it, bright, symmetrical, full of artificial joy. The streets fill with dancers who vanish the moment the song ends. The colors sharpen, the light changes. It's the closest thing to beauty the show ever allows itself. But there's always a trace of irony in that beauty. The lyrics are clever, self-aware, often mocking the sentiment they perform. Yet behind the parody lies something real. The longing for sincerity in a world that doesn't believe in it anymore. The musical numbers are the moments when the show admits it wants to feel something genuine. even if it can only do so through satire. It's the paradox that defines Family Guy. The joke and the yearning for truth existing in the same breath. Think of Peter's booming voice in Shipoopi, or Brian and Stewie's bittersweet duets, or the gleeful chaos of the road to episodes, and each song is both ridiculous and weirdly moving. They don't advance the story, they suspend it. In that suspension, time slows and the world becomes softer, clearer. Even if you're laughing, a part of you feels the rhythm in your chest, the brass and swing, the Broadway harmonies. They're nostalgic for something that never truly existed, except in the collective dream of American entertainment. What's most fascinating is how complete those numbers are. The animation suddenly sharpens, the lighting becomes cinematic, the choreography, the expressions, the transitions, all perfect for a few minutes, as if the world has suddenly remembered how to be beautiful. And then just as suddenly it's gone. The song ends and the characters stand awkwardly in silence, the magic collapsing back into everyday absurdity. The spell breaks. No one mentions it again, that silence after a Family Guy musical number is its own kind of poetry. The laughter returns, but it sounds different. Emptier, lighter, as if the song took something with it when it left. The characters don't realize it, but for those few minutes, they've stepped outside the loop. They've lived in pure feeling. And the universe, realizing it's let them glimpse something too human, gently resets the tone. The songs linger, though. Even after the jokes resume, you can feel their melody humming faintly beneath the surface, like a dream half remembered after waking. They are the show's confession that, despite all its cynicism, it still loves spectacle, harmony, the artifice of joy. In their strange way, they are prayers, musical wishes for meaning, disguised as jokes about television tropes. And maybe that's why they're so comforting. Because in a world built on absurdity, the music reminds you that beauty can exist even where nothing makes sense. It doesn't last and it doesn't need to. It rises, glows, and fades, leaving behind the faint shimmer of something that felt real for a moment. Then, with a drum roll and a laugh track, the dream carries on. The musical numbers of Family Guy are proof that even within satire, there's a heartbeat that refuses to be silenced. The jokes may reset, the story may loop, but somewhere inside the noise, the show still sings. Every so often, Family Guy looks straight into the camera, smiles knowingly, and admits it knows exactly what it is. Those are the meta episodes. The moments when the show peels back its paper-thin reality and lets you see the machinery underneath. They're not just jokes about television. They're reflections on the act of existing inside it. For a brief moment, the dream acknowledges itself as a dream. And in doing so, it becomes something strangely profound. Meta-humor has always been built into Family Guy's DNA. From the pilot onward, Peter and the others speak as though they can hear the laugh track. They reference Fox, complain about the writers, criticize their own ratings. They know they're being watched. But the true meta-episodes go further. They don't just break the fourth wall. They dissolve it completely. They let the audience feel what it might be like to live in a world that resets, where every tragedy is temporary and every story exists only for amusement. There's an uncanny calm in those moments. When Peter suddenly appears in an executive's office, or when Stewie debates the logic of his own continuity, the show transforms from comedy into quiet existentialism. The characters don't seem panicked by their artificiality, they're amused by it, maybe even comforted. To be fictional, after all, is to be safe. Nothing can truly end. Every line can be rewritten. Every mistake fades when the next episode begins, and yet that safety carries its own loneliness. The awareness that you will never touch anything that lasts. One of the purest examples of this comes in the episodes that openly reconstruct Family Guy as a television production, characters referring to the script and referencing cutaways as editing choices, or acknowledging their past cancellations. When Peter jokes about filling time, he's not just breaking character. He's revealing the strange void that sits beneath the show's structure. It's the same void that exists under every sitcom laugh, every bright scene transition, the quiet emptiness of a universe that must keep performing to survive. Then there are the road to episodes which function like self-contained films, openly modeled after old Hollywood adventures. Stewie and Brian often step out of Quagmire entirely, commenting on their own storytelling format while parodying it. They'll reference their own animation budget, the sound of the orchestra, even the way emotional beats are manipulated. In those moments, Family Guy becomes its own narrator, a show dreaming about itself, aware of its rhythm, reflecting on its audience like a mirror held up to infinity. There's comfort in that repetition, too. When the show laughs at its own predictability, it invites you to join in the illusion knowingly. It says, "We both know this is all pretend, but let's enjoy pretending together." It's the kind of self-awareness that makes the absurdity feel safe. You're not just watching, you're participating in the cycle. The show collapses the distance between watcher and watched, until Quahog becomes less a place and more a shared state of mind. One where irony and affection coexist perfectly. Sometimes, though, the meta slips too far. A joke goes beyond awareness and brushes against sadness. When Brian questions his own intelligence or Peter realizes he's been written out of an episode, there's a flicker of unease, as if the show is briefly tired of itself. It's hard to tell whether the writers mean it or whether the feeling simply escapes accidentally, like a sigh caught on tape. That's the strange beauty of Family Guy's meta-humor. It's too honest for its own good. It can't lie about its own emptiness without revealing something sincere beneath it. The meta-episodes function like mirrors held to mirrors, reflections that stretch into infinity until you can't tell where the show ends and the audience begins. They remind us that all fiction is self-aware eventually, that every story learns it's a story if it lives long enough. For Family Guy, that awareness isn't a flaw. It's its identity. It's the warm hum that fills the silence between punchlines, whispering, "We know this is all ridiculous, and that's why it matters." When the credits roll and the theme song begins again, you realize that every wink to the camera, every self-referential joke, every comment about cancellation or revival is part of the same message. The dream knows it's looping, and it's fine with that. The world of Quahog doesn't need to be real. It only needs to remember that it exists because you're still watching. And so every meta-episode becomes an act of gratitude, a gentle handshake between creator and viewer saying, "Yes, we know this world resets forever, but tonight it's real enough." Religion in Family Guy does not exist as dogma or belief. It exists as background noise, the faint hum of an idea that humanity once took seriously before it became another thing to laugh at. Yet in the Griffin household, faith still lingers like dust in sunlight. It's there in the questions no one asks, the prayers no one finishes, the strange sense that someone, somewhere might be watching, even if it's only the audience. The show treats religion the way Quahog treats time, consequence, or death, with an affectionate kind of disbelief. It mocks belief, yet cannot quite let it go. Peter is the accidental theologian of this world. He meets God regularly, argues with him, sometimes injures him, and yet never truly understands what any of it means. God in Family Guy is less a deity than a recurring neighbor, flawed, distracted, occasionally lonely. He lives in heaven as if it were a small apartment complex, drinks beer, dates, forgets prayers. The joke is always that divinity is human, but beneath the laughter lies a strange reverence. The show's God is not omnipotent, but he is gentle. He forgives because the world around him cannot help but reset. His love is built into the physics of the show. Every sin disappears by next week. Lois, meanwhile, carries a subtler kind of faith. She isn't devout, but her sense of morality functions like prayer. Her patience, her forgiveness, her constant rebuilding of the family. These are acts of devotion in a universe where grace must take physical form. She never preaches, but she lives as though she believes someone should be watching, even if no one is. Her small gestures, the dinner on the table, the quiet sighs, the way she corrects Peter with love rather than anger, are a kind of liturgy. Through her, Family Guy reminds us that goodness does not require belief, it only requires endurance. Stewie's relationship with religion is purely intellectual. To him, theology is another system to analyze, disassemble, and mock. He approaches God the way he approaches time travel. As a puzzle to outsmart, and yet occasionally the pretense fades. In moments of fear or sadness when his intellect can't protect him, he speaks to something larger, never directly but through silence, through a brief softening of the voice. It's as if he's too intelligent to believe, but too aware not to hope. Brian's atheism is the show's conscience turned cynical. He argues against faith because he wants it to be true and can't stand that it isn't. His disbelief feels less like certainty and more like heartbreak. When he debates religion, it's never just about logic, it's about loss. His skepticism is the wound of a being who understands the rules of his world too well to trust in miracles. And yet, in the episode where he dies and returns, he experiences the closest thing to resurrection. He never mentions faith afterward, but the silence is telling. He no longer mocks the idea of God, because he has felt the machinery of divine reset. Even Meg, invisible and neglected, occupies a religious role without knowing it. She's the scapegoat, the quiet sufferer who absorbs the family's cruelty and remains standing. Her endurance is a kind of sainthood, a spiritual act of survival in a town that never learns kindness. Meg's pain is the closest thing Family Guy has to spiritual gravity. She hurts so that everyone else can keep laughing. And though no one thanks her, she remains. The Church of Quahog itself is a parody. Priests who misunderstand their own sermons, congregations that vanish between episodes. But every so often the show lets a hymn play too long. A few soft organ notes echo in the background. A line of sincerity slips through the irony. You realize that beneath the jokes, the show remembers the feeling of faith, even if it no longer practices it. The Griffin family doesn't believe in religion the way people do. They live it accidentally. Their lives are a perpetual cycle of sin and forgiveness, chaos and calm, fall and renewal. Every episode is its own parable, a mistake, a consequence, and a return to grace. The moral lessons may be absurd, but the rhythm is unmistakably spiritual. Family Guy, for all its irreverence, has built its own theology. One where laughter replaces prayer, and redemption arrives disguised as a reset button. Maybe that's the truest kind of faith for Quahog. Not belief in a higher power, but belief in continuity. The quiet trust that no matter what happens, no matter how much breaks, tomorrow everything will begin again. The family will gather. The house will still stand. The sun will rise over Spooner Street as if nothing ever went wrong. And in that endless return lies the strangest comfort. A world without salvation, but also without damnation. A heaven of repetition where forgiveness is automatic and love, though flawed, never runs out. There are few images in Family Guy more iconic or more bewildering than Peter Griffin locked in eternal battle with the giant chicken. It begins without warning, a routine moment, A conversation, a casual walk down Spooner Street, and suddenly there he is, the chicken, looming in silence, holding out a coupon or a grudge or nothing at all. Peter's eyes narrow, the music swells, and then the dream collapses into chaos. For several unbroken minutes, the laws of storytelling vanish. The fight consumes everything. No words, no reason, only violence rendered in exquisite absurdity. Buildings crumble, cities fall, continents shift, and yet, by the next scene, both characters stand unharmed. It is one of television's longest-running feuds and one of its most meaningless. But that meaninglessness is the point. The chicken fights are Family Guy's purest expression of repetition. Conflict without consequence, rage without cause, destruction without trauma. It's the show's myth of eternal return played as slapstick ballet. Each fight begins as if it's the first. Each ends without resolution. You could rearrange their order and lose nothing. They exist outside time like dreams that keep replaying because the mind cannot wake from them. When you watch the first few seconds of each battle, there's a flicker of something ancient in the rhythm. It's primal, ritualistic. Two forces meeting again and again to remind the universe that it can still move. In a world where every other problem is solved with a joke or a reset, the chicken represents something different. Persistence. An unstoppable narrative impulse that refuses to be forgotten. Every time the show threatens to grow predictable, the chicken returns to break the illusion. The sheer scale of the violence, planes crashing, cities burning, time itself warping, is so disproportionate to its cause that it becomes poetic. It's the absurd made sacred. The feud has no history, no purpose, and yet it continues, echoing through seasons and decades. Each fight is both a parody and a prophecy, suggesting that human conflict, no matter how meaningless, has its own strange beauty when freed from consequence. Peter's role in it is fascinating. Most of the time, he's oblivious, content, unthinking. But when the chicken appears, something ancient wakes in him. His face changes, his energy hardens. For a few moments, he's no longer a fool, but a warrior. Pointless, yes, but oddly focused. The chicken draws out his most primal self, the part of him that never speaks but only acts. It's as though they share an understanding that no one else in Quahog can see. This fight will outlast them both. Sometimes the battle stretches for 5 minutes, sometimes 10. They tumble through oceans, outer space, history itself. They die and revive, wound and heal, destroy and rebuild, all in the same breath. Each scene resets the same way the show does, instantly, perfectly, without explanation. The world rebuilds itself around them, and they walk away as though nothing happened. There are no scars, no questions, no memory. The fight exists and then evaporates, leaving behind only the faint echo of its absurdity. And yet, every time it happens, there's a sense of release. The chicken fights serve the same purpose as the musical numbers, catharsis without consequence. The show empties its chaos into those scenes so that everything else can return to calm. When Peter throws a punch, it's not anger, it's cleansing. The world around him disintegrates so that Quahog can return to peace again. If you think of Family Guy as a cycle of laughter and reset, then the chicken is its hidden ritual, the part that must be performed so the dream can continue. Peter and the chicken are eternal opposites, not because they hate each other, but because they define each other. Without the chicken, Peter would lose his momentary focus, his purpose. Without Peter, the chicken would lose its reason to exist. They are yin and yang in animated form, comedy's answer to myth. In the end, every chicken fight is the same. It begins without sense, builds toward apocalypse, and ends in silence. The characters dust themselves off, walk home, and the story resumes as though nothing happened. But you remember. You always remember. The absurdity burns itself into your mind, impossible to forget because it means nothing. And that's what makes it strangely peaceful. There's a comfort in a fight that never ends, a familiarity in its pointlessness. It's the universe reminding you that even Quog has pattern, and that even destruction can be graceful when repeated often enough. Peter and the chicken are not enemies. They are eternity, punching itself awake just to feel alive for a moment. The world of Family Guy was born at the turn of a century that was beginning to lose its innocence. By the time Quag appeared on television screens, irony had already replaced sincerity and laughter had become a kind of armor. The show arrived perfectly timed, a mirror held to a culture that no longer believed in the things it used to worship. In that sense, Family Guy is more than satire. It is the shape of modern cynicism itself. Its humor is not cruel for cruelty's sake. It's the byproduct of a world too aware of its own absurdity to speak plainly anymore. Every joke in Family Guy carries that double edge, amusement and fatigue, laughter and detachment. When Peter mocks tragedy, or Brian dismantles an argument, or Lois sighs through another disaster, the tone isn't just parody, it's commentary on the exhaustion of meaning. The characters don't laugh because they're carefree. They laugh because caring too much would break them. Their world resets each week because that's the only way to survive. Modern irony. You erase what hurts and start again, pretending it never mattered. The show's earliest seasons felt like rebellion. Fast, shocking, unapologetic. But as the years went on, that sharpness evolved into something quieter, almost melancholy. The jokes became self-referential, the satire more meta, the laughter a little slower. It's as if Family Guy grew tired of pretending not to care. The cynicism remained, but it softened into self-awareness. The show stopped trying to hide that its cruelty was a form of affection, that its mockery was, at heart, a plea for connection in a world that communicates through irony. Peter embodies this perfectly. His ignorance is exaggerated, but underneath it lies the modern everyman's numbness. He doesn't think deeply because deep thought leads to despair. He fills the silence with noise, television, cutaways, food, jokes, because stillness would mean feeling. The absurdity protects him. Every laugh is a shield against meaning. The entire show becomes an ecosystem of avoidance, where laughter replaces understanding and comfort comes from repetition rather than revelation. Brian's cynicism is the intellectual version of that same defense. He cloaks his loneliness in reason, his confusion in debate. His atheism, his liberalism, his supposed sophistication, all of it masks a quiet panic, the fear that there's nothing beneath the surface. He speaks like someone afraid that silence will prove him right. His sarcasm is a prayer made of logic, and when he fails, he drinks. Not to escape, but to dull the sound of his own awareness. Lois carries a gentler form of cynicism, the cynicism of endurance. She doesn't mock the world. She simply accepts it as flawed beyond repair. Her calm isn't optimism, it's resignation turned graceful. She's seen too much absurdity to believe in moral resolution anymore, yet she keeps cooking dinner, keeps forgiving, keeps playing her part. In her, cynicism becomes love disguised as patience. Even Stewie, once the show's most villainous voice, has evolved into something bittersweet. His intelligence isolates him. His awareness of the loop robs him of wonder. He's cynical not because he hates the world, but because he understands it too clearly to hope for change. His genius is a burden, his sarcasm a soft lament. Every quip hides the sadness of knowing that sincerity is impossible in a place that resets endlessly. That's the quiet tragedy of Family Guy's cynicism. It isn't cold, it's tired. It's the laughter of people who've seen too much repetition to expect redemption. But within that fatigue lies comfort. The show's refusal to take anything seriously creates a strange safety. Nothing can hurt when nothing is sacred, and in that blank space where sincerity used to be, the show builds a new kind of warmth, one born from shared disbelief. There's a moment at the end of many episodes where everyone returns to the couch, the chaos behind them, the television flickering in front of them. They don't speak. They don't reflect. They simply sit. That moment, more than any punchline, captures the shape of modern cynicism. Quiet coexistence in the face of meaninglessness. It's not nihilism, it's survival. Family Guy's long life is proof that cynicism, when honest, becomes its own kind of faith. The show doesn't promise enlightenment or transformation. It offers endurance, the promise that even if the world is absurd, there will still be laughter, still be breakfast, still be another episode tomorrow. And maybe that's what cynicism really is now, not disbelief, but the fragile hope that we can keep laughing together even when we know the joke will never end. Every long-running animated show lives in some way under the shadow of The Simpsons. It's not just history, it's gravity. When Family Guy first aired in 1999, it arrived in a world that already had a blueprint for the animated American family. The clumsy father, the patient wife, the gifted baby, the familiar suburban home. The template existed. But rather than copy it, Family Guy took that shadow and painted over it with noise, speed, and absurdity. It didn't try to escape The Simpsons. It embraced the comparison and exaggerated it until the reflection cracked. You can see the ghost of The Simpsons in every corner of Quahog. The Griffin house is brighter, simpler, almost too clean, like a parody of Springfield's warmth. Peter's laugh echoes Homer's chuckle but stretches it into manic distortion. Lois has Marge's patience but no illusion of virtue. Stewie is both Maggie and Bart, speech where there should be silence, genius where there should be mischief. Even the structure of the show, those early storylines about family dinners and middle-class absurdities, begins as imitation and ends as rebellion. But what's fascinating isn't that Family Guy lives in The Simpsons' shadow. It's that it learned to thrive there. Instead of competing for the same sunlight, it turned the darkness into tone. Where The Simpsons spoke in empathy, Family Guy spoke in irony. Where Springfield gently exposed American life, Quahog tore it apart with laughter. Both towns are mirrors of the same dream, but one shows it with warmth, the other with exhaustion. The difference isn't moral, it's temporal. The Simpsons was born in optimism. Family Guy was born as eaten in aftermath. Still, the two worlds sometimes touch. There's that famous crossover episode, The Simpsons Guy, where the Griffins wander into Springfield, and the two families share space for a brief, surreal moment. It's played for comedy, a collision of tones, but if you watch closely, there's something oddly touching about it. Peter and Homer, two men from two universes fighting over beer and nonsense, become twin reflections of the same archetype. The eternal sitcom father, flawed, but indestructible. The episode acknowledges, without saying it directly, that Family Guy could not exist without The Simpsons. The shadow isn't a burden, it's a foundation. The differences between them reveal the eras they were born from. The Simpsons carries the emotional language of the late 20th century, a faith that people are foolish but redeemable, that love can soften absurdity. Family Guy, emerging into the 21st, inherits that same absurdity but strips it of sentimentality. Its laughter is faster, its cruelty sharper, its truths colder. Where the Simpsons taught that family could save you, Family Guy quietly wonders if family is just another form of repetition we endure. Both are right in their own ways. Over time, the shadow between them became a conversation rather than a comparison. The shows reference each other openly now, trading jokes like old colleagues who know they'll share eternity on late-night reruns. The rivalry mellowed into recognition. They coexist as two halves of the same cultural consciousness. Springfield, the dream of who we wanted to be. Quahog, the reality of who we became. There's something poetic about that balance. The Simpsons looks outward toward community, morality, and change. Family Guy looks inward toward memory, irony, and fatigue. One radiates light, the other reflects it in fractured patterns. Together, they form a complete picture of American satire, the hope and the hangover, the prayer and the punchline. And perhaps that's why Family Guy's shadow feels peaceful now. It no longer tries to escape it. It exists comfortably in the shared twilight of television memory, where both shows loop endlessly, comforting and mocking the same audience. The Simpsons whispers that life can be better. Family Guy answers softly that life, even as it is, can still make you laugh. In that exchange lies a quiet kind of grace. Shadows don't erase light. They prove it exists. And in the eternal glow of the cartoon universe, Springfield and Quahog stand side by side, two different frequencies of the same dream, repeating forever under the same warm artificial sun. No one in Quahog grows old, and yet the town never dies. Its streets are drawn again and again. Its skyline remains unchanging. Its stories keep regenerating like cells in a body that refuses decay. Decades have passed outside the television screen, but inside, it is always the same quiet afternoon. The same bar, the same living room, the same static sky. What keeps Quahog alive is not realism, it's rhythm. A pulse built from laughter, routine, and a strange loyalty to its own illusion. There's a sense that Quahog isn't just a town, but a kind of organism. The characters are its thoughts. The cutaways are its dreams. The houses are its memory cells, rebuilding themselves after every explosion or catastrophe. Each episode functions like a heartbeat, rising, collapsing, and then resting again in perfect rhythm. You can feel it when you watch long enough. The comforting repetition of the familiar, the way chaos always folds back into stillness. That's what keeps it alive. The refusal to let anything truly end. The town runs on equilibrium. For every moment of absurdity, there's a moment of calm. For every act of destruction, a quiet reset. Peter's recklessness tears holes in the fabric of reality, but Lois's patience stitches them shut. Stewie breaks the rules of physics. Brian restores logic. Meg absorbs pain. Chris diffuses tension. The citizens of Quahog unconsciously balance one another like organs in a strange, self-healing body. None of them change because change would break the symmetry. They live not in progress, but in maintenance. Even the humor serves this purpose. The jokes, fast and relentless, act like oxygen, feeding the town's circulation. They're not just written for laughter. They're the mechanism by which the world renews itself. Each punchline is a release valve, preventing the tension of absurdity from building too high. When Peter crashes a car or offends a nation, when Stewie alters the timeline or Brian spirals into cynicism, the joke lands and resets the pressure. The world exhales. Quahog lives another day. There's an almost spiritual undertone to that repetition. In a sense, Quahog's immortality is a reflection of our own need for continuity. It persists because we return to it. Every rerun, every streaming session, every late-night episode looping in the background is a ritual of remembrance. The town exists as long as it's watched. The laughter of the audience is the air that fills its lungs. When the screen goes black, Quag doesn't vanish. It sleeps, waiting for another signal, another viewer, another flicker of attention to bring it back to life. What keeps it alive isn't change, but acceptance. The characters have made peace with their limits. They no longer reach for transformation. They embody endurance. Peter's stupidity, Lois's patience, Stewie's intellect, Brian's irony, Meg's invisibility, Chris's quiet neutrality. Each trait has become a kind of mantra. Together they form the DNA of the show's eternal being. If any one of them truly grew, the organism would collapse. So they hold their places like planets in orbit, repeating their motions perfectly, endlessly. You can see it in the town itself, the streets always clean after case, the sun always perfectly hung in the same spot, the grass never aging, the buildings never crumbling. It's an eternal suburbia preserved in amber, a vision of America frozen at its most comfortable and absurd moment. The dream refuses to decay because the dreamer still needs it. Maybe that's the real secret of Quag's life. It survives not because it defies death, but because it has made peace with it. It has accepted the loop, found serenity in sameness. The people laugh because the alternative, awareness of eternity, would be unbearable. The laughter keeps them grounded. It keeps the dream warm. If you imagine Quag late at night when the television is off, you can almost hear the hum of its machinery. The flicker of the Griffin house lights, the soft neon glow of the drunken clam, the static whisper of the Channel 5 newsroom. The town rests like a living thing in deep sleep, its heartbeat steady, waiting for the next joke to wake it. Quag lives because it was never meant to die. It's not a story. It's a pulse. As long as someone somewhere presses play, the dream continues. The streets light up. The characters breathe again. The laughter begins and the town exhales. In that rhythm, that endless forgiving loop, Quag finds its immortality. Every episode of Family Guy ends the same way, quietly, almost shyly, as if the universe itself has grown tired and wishes to rest. The chaos settles, the music softens, the family regathers in their living room. Someone says something faintly reflective. The laugh track sighs, and then the scene freezes into stillness. For a moment, there is calm, and then without fanfare, it begins again. The next episode, the next loop, the next small eternity disguised as 22 minutes of comedy. This repetition isn't a flaw. It's the show's heartbeat. The loop is what keeps Quag alive and what gives Family Guy its strange serenity. It's a rhythm that never breaks, a system that endlessly repairs itself. Every death, every disaster, every moral collapse, washed away by time that doesn't move forward, only around. The cycle becomes a kind of comfort. In this world, nothing truly changes and nothing is truly lost. It's the safest possible eternity, one where forgiveness is built into physics. Peter will always laugh again. Lois will always forgive him. Stewie will always rebuild his inventions. Brian will always drink and doubt. Meg will always be ignored, yet always present. Chris will always float in the middle, untouched by the storm. They are archetypes more than characters now, like figures in an old painting that keeps reanimating itself each night. They exist to continue to embody a pattern that feels as old as storytelling itself. The return, the reset, the laughter after ruin, every television show wants meaning. But Family Guy found something subtler: rhythm. It's not a story that leads anywhere, but a loop that sustains itself by accepting its own emptiness. That emptiness becomes a kind of peace. In a real world that changes too fast, Quag offers stability. You can leave it for years, return and find everything exactly as it was. The same jokes, the same colors, the same strange comfort of nothing ever ending. The loop is also an act of mercy. Within it, no one truly suffers for long. Pain flickers, disappears, mistakes vanish. The world forgives automatically. There is no apocalypse here, no final lesson, no true conclusion, only continuation. The characters may rage or despair, but the loop protects them. It doesn't allow grief to linger. The show's universe loves them too much, perhaps, to let them feel consequence for more than a moment. It is a gentle, mechanical kind of love, the way a lullaby loves the child it keeps putting to sleep. And in that rhythm, something poetic emerges. You realize that Family Guy is not about its plots at all. It's about the experience of continuity itself. Watching it feels like listening to a tide that never recedes completely. You know the sound by heart. You know what will happen. But you keep listening because the familiarity becomes beautiful. It's not suspense that draws you in. It's recognition. When you think about it long enough, you start to understand why it feels so soothing to fall asleep to Family Guy. The laughter becomes white noise. The characters' voices merge into a hum of predictability. The loop, once absurd, becomes a rhythm your mind trusts. It's not chaos anymore, it's order. Every punchline promises that life will continue, that nothing you break can stay broken. It's the same comfort that keeps people replaying old songs, old shows, old moments of meaning. The quiet, merciful idea that repetition can feel like safety. In the end, the loop doesn't trap the Griffins, it preserves them. Their immortality isn't tragic, it's tender. They remain there forever, mid-laugh, untouched by time, endlessly surviving themselves. The cutaway gags, the musical numbers, the explosions, the absurdities, they all fold back into that simple living room. That same warm couch, that same television glow. And maybe that's the secret heart of Family Guy. Beneath all the noise and irony, it has built a world that cannot die. A world that forgives every mistake, heals every wound, and laughs every sorrow away. A world where even the darkest absurdity can be softened by routine. The loop is not a curse, it's a lullaby, so when the episode ends and the familiar theme song begins, those brass notes rising, that cheerful rhythm repeating, you can feel it happening again. Another story, another crash, another quiet return. The lights of Quog glow softly against the static night, waiting for you to watch, to listen, to dream. And as you drift towards sleep, the loop hums on. Peter laughs somewhere, Stewie schemes, Lois sighs. The television light flickers across an unmoving sky. Nothing has changed, and nothing needs to. The world continues exactly as it was meant to. The dream holds. The loop remains forever.